Hello everyone. How you doing tonight? I thought I would hop on here and do a late night live. I've been doing afternoon ones, so I thought that a night one might be good. So I'm here and I've got plenty of unnamed orange beverage. And I'm happy to talk with everyone tonight. A couple things that are on my mind I'll bring up, and then I'll do a kind of a reading for you, and then we'll do our roll call, and then we'll answer your super chats, and then we'll be done. And just kind of a way to pass the time here at night. Shout out to those of you who work nights. This is a way we can entertain ourselves. Shout out to everyone who's watching this later, right? Watching this tomorrow while you're at work, watching this tomorrow to pass the time, watching this as you drive to work, drive home from work, while you take a shower, you're listening to my lovely voice. Hey, whatever you can do to pass the time. Folks, if you haven't already done so, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this on Facebook, share this on Twitter, share this on Reddit, share this on Instagram, share this however you want, share it on TikTok while you still can, right? It's getting down to the wire. Down to the wire. Will TikTok be shut down or not? Folks, Donald Trump is now in hot water for the fact that a tape has surfaced of a conversation he had with Bob Woodward, the reporter, in which he acknowledged that COVID-19 was not just like the flu, and that it was actually airborne. And being that it was airborne, that would mean you need to wear a mask. At a time, the White House was not yet telling people that. And everyone is up in arms, absolutely rightly so, that Donald Trump knew how bad COVID-19 was. But rather than give us the proper instructions to put masks on, he downplayed it and said it's just like the flu. At the same time he's telling Bob Woodward the actual truth, it turns out, was going out in front of the public and saying the opposite on Twitter and elsewhere. Now, one thing I just wanted to point out about that clip that has surfaced, the audio tape of Bob Woodward and Donald Trump talking, is what does Donald Trump say before he talks about how bad COVID is? He says, I just talked to President Xi. Meaning that President Xi gave Donald Trump the right information, while the U.S. government was telling people that they maybe not needing to wear a mask, not clear about who needed to wear a mask. President Xi Jinping of China gave Donald Trump the right information. Keep that in mind. Our government officials got the correct information from China about COVID-19. President Xi and Donald Trump spoke. China gave the United States and Donald Trump the correct information. Our government officials knew that correct information, but told the public otherwise. And it's already come out. It wasn't just Trump that knew the reality of how bad the pandemic would be and told the public otherwise, right? We know about how Dianne Feinstein went and sold her stocks. Check that out, and how they bet against the stock market because they knew it was going to be bad, while they told the public everything was going to be fine. Now we know Donald Trump telling people that it was just as bad as the flu, and then saying on the phone to Bob Woodward at the exact same time, oh yeah, it's definitely worse than the flu, it's airborne. It's airborne, meaning he should have been telling people to wear masks from the beginning, but you'll recall that Donald Trump wouldn't even wear a mask for a long time. This is pretty scandalous stuff, and I'm not defending Trump on this at all. No, he deserves no defense. Daniel DeLeon, we'll talk about that. Donald Trump deserves no defense on this, right? He is absolutely, he's trying to change the subject. Now he's trying to say, oh, I didn't want to make the public panic. Well, by not making the public panic, people were not taking proper, safety procedures. He should have been calm, but he should have given the correct information. That's not an excuse. That is not an excuse, right? It'd be like, the school is on fire and the teacher never tells the students to leave the classroom. Well, I didn't want the students to panic. That's not an excuse, right? You can tell them in a way that doesn't make them panic. You can say, we now need to follow our fire procedures, exit the building. that's not an excuse. I didn't want the public to panic. Not an excuse. Not an excuse. No, doesn't cut it. Doesn't cut it. And the other line is they say, oh, well, Bob Woodward sat on this for so long. So this had to have been, as we're being told, this had to have been an October surprise. Well, it very well could be that by the Democrats. I mean, that doesn't make it not true, though, right? We now know that Donald Trump knew how bad it was going to be. And he pushed his supporters to go out and have open up rallies in Michigan and Ohio and places like that. These protests that his supporters were encouraged to go out and demand the economy open up, the I need a haircut protests, right? Before the Black Lives Matter stuff got going this summer, you'll remember that there was that big wave of pro-Trump Tea Party rallies where they couldn't quite clearly say what they believed. Some of them believed that COVID-19 was a big, Illuminati hoax, and others believed it was real, but real men don't wear masks, and only weaklings would be considerate of other people, or something. It was, they were doing those stupid protests. So, your thoughts on the communist movement in the Philippines, your response to South China Sea dilemma. I can ask the same questions over and over and over again, but we'll talk about it. Alrighty. But, yeah. I mean, it's just pretty outrageous. It's very, very outrageous. Donald Trump, he pushed his supporters to go out and protest, and he himself he knew it was airborne. And not only did he know it was airborne, but on top of that, let's be real, Donald Trump also, let's not forget, was saying that it was just as bad as the flu. It was just like the flu. This is pretty unbelievable. Pretty unbelievable. And no defense on this. I mean, there's no defense on this. But why don't we slow down though and talk about what Bob Woodward said, right, in the interview? Right? Not what Bob Woodward said, what Trump said before he launched into giving the accurate information about the COVID-19 virus. He said he just talked with President Xi. He just talked with President Xi, meaning China gave the correct information. Right? This is all supposed to be China's fault. All China's fault. All supposed to be China's fault. But now we know that China gave the correct information to Donald Trump. Donald Trump repeated that information to Bob Woodward, and then he went out to the U.S. public and told them something different. But somehow it's all China's fault, right? I don't get it. I really, really don't get it, right? And I think that's a little bit of important information. Let's look at what Donald Trump was saying at the beginning of the pandemic when Trump said China was doing a great job. You remember that? Oh, China's doing a great job. They're doing a great job. Do you remember when at the beginning of this pandemic, you'll recall how not only did Donald Trump say China was doing a great job, but U.S. media attacked China for their lockdown mechanisms. Remember that? U.S. media was saying, oh, China, this authoritarian country, they're locking people down. They're quarantining people. It's awful. Their response is crazy. So Donald Trump was taking the pro-China position. U.S. media was playing up like it was a humanitarian crime. I mean, it was pretty outrageous. No, I'm not voting for Joe Biden, the person who persistently asked that question. I've repeatedly said on here, I do not endorse any political candidate, but I've also emphasized that I am not convinced, as bad as Trump is, I am not convinced Joe Biden is better. It's possible. I respect people who take that position, but that's not my position. My position is not that Joe Biden is better than Trump. I recently published a book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, and talked about how dangerous Kamala Harris is, right? I mean, look into who Kamala Harris is. Get a copy of Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I just did a great podcast about it with Twink Revolution. Great. You guys should check out Twink Revolution. They are great. They have controversial guests. They are gay men. They are two gay men from San Francisco, and they are Marxists, and they are revolutionaries, and they are great. And they had me on their podcast to talk about the new book. Check out Twink Rev, and And, the book, it's out there. People are reading it. It's surprising them. Kamala Harris is very, very scary. Very, very scary. I would not be able to vote for Joe Biden. I don't think I'd be able to bring myself to do it because below Biden's name would be magazine monthly review. Sure, we'll talk about monthly review. Monthly review. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to bring myself to do it because Joe Biden's name has Kamala Harris's name on it. She is on the ticket. And we all know Joe Biden is an old man, right? Whoever wins, interesting fact, whoever wins this upcoming election, Trump or Biden, they will be the oldest president in all of U.S. history. Did you know that? Little interesting fact. But either one. Someone told me Marx and Lenin would vote Biden. Well, all right. Marx, Lenin. Writing it down. I'll get to that. I always try to answer your super chats, folks. Even if they're repetitive ones, I'll answer it, If it's the same question as I've been asked a number of times before, I may not go into as much depth as I do the first time. But, if you ask the same question, I'll answer it again. But yeah, I've stated that I am very, very critical. What was Coney 2012? Wow, that's an interesting one. We can talk about Coney 2012. I wrote an article about it at the time. But yeah, another interesting tidbit of information. So right now in U.S. media, there are starting to be reports that ISIS is once again gaining ground in Syria and in Iraq. Now, it's not 100% confirmed that that is necessarily true, right? But we're starting to see reports that ISIS might be on the move again. And who does U.S. media blame for this? Iran. And how does that make any sense? I have no clue. But it's somehow, in the minds of U.S. media, if ISIS is on the move again in Syria and Iraq, if they're starting to gain some ground, if there's some people that are starting to expand, if that's happening, somehow it's Iran's fault. Well, they seem to have failed to recognize that Iran was the main enemy of ISIS on the battlefield. I went to Iran. I went to the outskirts of Tehran, where they have a graveyard, where they bury Revolutionary Guards who died on the battlefield in Syria against ISIS. Okay, writing it down. And I've seen it with my own eyes. Iran is anti-ISIS. ISIS originated as a faction within the anti-Assad, anti-Gaddafi extremists supported by Saudi Arabia and the United States. In fact, if you look at the history, many of the key leaders of ISIS were directly supported by the United States before they joined ISIS. They were just part of the so-called moderate rebels. And so somebody said in there they thought ISIS is anti-imperialist. ISIS is not anti-imperialist. Wahhabism, the ideology of Saudi Arabia, that is something the imperialists have been whipping up intentionally, like with bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and now with ISIS. They have been whipping up that ideology for a long time to try and utilize it against anti-imperialist states. That's the whole reality of the war on terror. In the war on terror, the U.S. government is not fighting against terrorism. It's fighting the enemies of the terrorists. It's a war for terrorism, right? Who was one of the biggest enemies of Al-Qaeda? Gaddafi, right? Gaddafi even offered to torture people to help the United States fight Al-Qaeda, right? Do you remember the rendition program? Gaddafi was on 9/11. Gaddafi said, wow, I've been fighting Al-Qaeda for years. Wow, okay, America, this is like a moment where we can get together. You know who else did that? Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein said, wow, we've been fighting Al-Qaeda for years. Wow, this can be a moment where we can get together. Bashar Assad also participated in the rendition program. He said, wow, we've been fighting Al-Qaeda for years. Wow, the USA hates Al-Qaeda? We hate Al-Qaeda. And who loves Al-Qaeda? Saudi Arabia, right? Bin Laden, the Bin Laden family, one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia, state monopoly on construction. So all the anti-imperialist states after 9/11 sent condolences to the United States and said, yes, let's work together. Iran, was sympathetic to the United States. Qasem Soleimani was sympathetic to the United States from the Revolutionary Guards. All the anti-imperialists in the Middle East said to the United States, wow, you got attacked by Al-Qaeda. So maybe you're going to wake up, America, and realize that supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS is not a good move, and supporting the Saudis, who are the fountainhead of Wahhabi ideology, is not a good move. Let's team up. Let's work together. Wow. And for some reason, the United States didn't do, no. In response to 9/11, did the USA invade Saudi Arabia, where the hijackers were from? No. Even though it's been revealed that look at the 28 pages that's been revealed, right? If they were going to invade any country after 9/11, according to the 28 pages, it should have been Saudi Arabia. Did they do that? No. They invaded, where did they invade? They invaded Iraq. Now, folks, Osama bin Laden is a Wahhabi fanatic. He believes in an autocratic monarchy. He believes in a strict Wahhabi Salafi interpretation of the Quran. That's bin Laden. Saddam Hussein was a Ba'athist Arab socialist. He was a secular leader. There were women in the government. Saddam Hussein believed in a secular government. There were Christians in Iraq. There were Sunni and Shia in the government of Iraq together, not even divided. People talked about how, it was a religious difference. People didn't even emphasize at that time. There were Sunni and Shia in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. There were women in the government. There were Christians that were protected. That's the country the United States invaded, supposedly because of 9/11, which was done by a Saudi guy who's a Wahhabi. After that, what has the United States done after 9/11? They attacked Libya, another country, a country that even offered to torture people, was so excited after 9/11 that finally America might fight the people they've been fighting for years. The USA toppled the government of Libya. The USA worked to foment civil war in Syria. And the people that the United States was backing to overthrow the Syrian government, a lot of them had ties to Al-Qaeda, right? The Al-Nusra Front, what was it previously known as? Al-Qaeda in Syria. Right? This was the Al-Nusra Front, and out of that mess of people armed and supported by the United States, out of that mess, writing it down, out of that mess of people supported by the United States, that's where ISIS came from. So now ISIS is not anti-imperialist. And you'll notice all the people ISIS attacks happen to be people the United States is also attacking. Bashar Assad in Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic, ISIS attacks them. Iran, right? ISIS has carried out attacks in Iran. Right? Everywhere ISIS goes and attacks people, they just happen to be people that, ISIS is always on the side of the imperialists. So, whoever said they thought ISIS was anti-imperialist is just delusional and doesn't understand the conflict there. Right? The problem with the war on terror is the United States isn't fighting the terrorists, it's fighting the enemies of the terrorists. So right now, ISIS allegedly is expanding in the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria. And somehow they blame Iran for this. They don't blame the United States. The United States, let's remember, killed one of the top anti-ISIS fighters in the Middle East, Qasem Soleimani. It's coming up on the anniversary this January. Qasem Soleimani was one of the top anti-ISIS fighters. He killed more ISIS terrorists than anybody. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran and Hezbollah, right, and the Syrian Arab Army, Ba'athist Arab Socialism, Bashar Assad, they are the ones who kicked ISIS ass. And Russia, let's remember, Russia did the bombing campaigns with the support, with the permission of the Syrian government. Russia was in there, right? There were communist militias that were formed in some areas in Iraq and Syria. There were Christian militias that were formed. It was a united front, right? Anti-imperialist forces, Christians, Sunnis, Shia, Muslims, Hezbollah, Iran, communists, Ba'athist Arab socialism. They got together and they kicked ISIS ass. Russian nationalists, Orthodox nationalists from Russia, a coalition of people who said ISIS is a monstrosity. And we're not going to take it anymore. We are going to fight back. And it was like World War II almost. But yet, the United States somehow, gets out of this that Iran is helping ISIS or something. That's ridiculous, right? ISIS considers Iran to be Shia apostates, right? In fact, one of the main reasons ISIS was involved in the struggle to overthrow Bashar Assad is because Bashar Assad, the leader of the Syrian Arab Republic, is an Alawite. He is not a Sunni Muslim. He is an Alawite, and Alawitism is considered to be a form of Shia Islam, right? The Alawites do not pray in mosques. They pray in prayer rooms in their homes because Imam Ali was stabbed to death and killed in a mosque. So because of that, I believe from what I understand, the teachings of Alawitism, it's a very secretive religion, right? But it's certain families, and it's men only, I believe, who practice Alawitism, and it's kind of secretive. They pray in their own homes. And my understanding is that they believe that the angel that was intended to visit the Prophet Muhammad was really intended to visit Imam Ali and visited the Prophet Muhammad by accident. If I'm not mistaken, that is the basis of the Alawite religion, right? They believe that Imam Ali was actually the one intended to be the prophet. They still consider themselves Muslims and acknowledge the Prophet Muhammad, but they have a special belief about the sacredness of Imam Ali. And a lot of top Syrian military people are Alawites. And Sunnis, not all Sunnis, but Wahhabis, the sectarian Wahhabi fanatics, believe that Alawites, along with Twelver Shia, like they have in Iran, along with Zaydi Shia, like the Houthis in Yemen, they believe that they are apostates and should be put to death. And that's why ISIS carried out a terrorist attack inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran and killed a number of Iranians because they believe the Iranian government are apostates. And actually, along the Afghan border with Iran, there is a terrorist group called Jindullah. And Jindullah, this terrorist group that operates along the Afghan border, is a Sunni separatist group. It wants to break off regions of Iran and make them into Sunni governments. They don't consider the Islamic Republic of Iran to be truly Islamic, right? It's the Saudis that have really kind of fomented this anti-Shia sectarian campaign. And it really started in the aftermath of Israel's invasion of Lebanon. Shortly after Israel invaded Lebanon and got its ass handed to it by Hezbollah, right? You remember this, right? In 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon, and Hezbollah kicked their ass. I mean, it drove them out of there like crazy. Israel didn't know what they were doing. They poked the Hezbollah bear. And at that point, the entire Arab world that hates Israel was cheering for Hezbollah, just was like in awe of Hezbollah, that Hezbollah could do that. So, and that was, you'll remember that war happened just as Obama was taking office, right? And Obama couldn't comment on it, you'll remember. If I'm not mistaken, Obama couldn't comment on it. It was around Christmas time, and he said, well, I'm not the president of the United States yet. There's only one president, so he couldn't comment. He hadn't taken the oath yet. So it was a way that Obama wouldn't be responsible for what was going on. Israel invades Lebanon. Hezbollah kicks their ass. And the whole Arab world was cheering for Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah were like considered the anti-imperialists of the Middle East, right? Because they fought Israel like that, and they handed Israel this defeat with their rockets and with their organized areas and their militias. They just very effectively defeated Israel. So after that, suddenly the clerics in Saudi Arabia, right, the top U.S.-aligned oil plantation, started fomenting anti-Shia hatred. All of a sudden, the clerics started talking about Shia apostates. Shia are not real Muslims. And just attacking Shia Muslims for all kinds of things that they consider them to be deviant. And that's when this sectarian campaign against Shia happened. At the same time that the whole Muslim world, and especially the Arab world, was just cheering for a Shia organization, Hezbollah or Shia Muslims, right? They're aligned with Iran. They're in Lebanon. And trust me, I saw it. I remember, I was at the time, I was a college student, and I remember I went to a national Palestine rally. And, at National Palestine rallies, people would chant against Israel and stuff. But what I saw at these National Palestine rallies was the crowds of people were all chanting. And it's a pretty brave chant, mind you, right? I mean, because Hezbollah is on the foreign terror organization list, right? You cannot associate with them. If you give material aid to them, you can go to jail for a long time. but I saw crowds and crowds of Palestine activists chanting, in Washington, D.C., broad daylight, police all around them, thousands of Palestine activists with their Palestine flags chanting, "Long live Hezbollah, long live Hezbollah," because the whole Arab world was just in awe of Hezbollah because they defeated Israel so much. So right after that, the Saudis started this sectarian campaign that Sunnis, and Sunnis and Shias shouldn't get along, that Shia Muslims are not real Muslims. This all started in response to the fact that a Shia organization called Hezbollah handed Israel such a brutal military defeat. Folks, there's all kinds of crazy stories. That particular war, I think it was 2006, that Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Some wild things happened. First of all, one thing that happened was that there were during that war, when the Israelis went in, they started broadcasting pornography onto the television. And it was a way to, it's a very conservative religious country. So all of a sudden the Israelis had it so all the TV in Lebanon had porn on the TV as a way to distract everyone. Check it out, right? Very wild. Got very little coverage in American media, but a way to, as kind of a psychological warfare operation, the Israelis put porno on the TV in Lebanon when they invaded. And, you can imagine in a very conservative society, if all of a sudden your TV has just got naked women all over it, you're going to be like, what? And it was a psychological warfare operation, right? To distract the public, to use pornography as a mind control method, right? Is to kind of, shock people, right? And it was an insult, too, to a deeply religious culture. If you're putting porno on their TV, it's kind of like, ha, 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 we're invading you and we're insulting your religion. We're shoving your face in it. It was pretty a nasty thing that Israel did. Not only that, but the other thing that happened was that when they rebuilt afterwards, right? You'll remember the USA had just had Hurricane Katrina and Louisiana was just devastated. Hezbollah rebuilt Lebanon very, very rapidly. It was like a mass mobilization. It was like Stalin's 5-year plans or something. And they just mobilized the people to just go out there and rebuild. And as they rebuilt like murals with the face of Hugo Chavez on it, right? Hugo Chavez, the leader of Venezuela. And they put up, okay, all right. COVID. And they put up murals, not only with the faces of Muslim leaders, but with the faces of Che Guevara, with the faces of Hugo Chavez. And Venezuela was very outspoken in defending Lebanon and its right to repel the Israeli invaders. So it was after that this sectarian campaign started. And the war on terror, the U.S. government are not fighting the terrorists, they're fighting the enemies of the terrorists. I mean, when Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, that was a pro-terrorist move. In all of the ISIS camps, they jumped up and down and cheered when they heard that Qasem Soleimani had been killed, because nobody has killed more ISIS terrorists than Qasem Soleimani. As the leader of the elite Quds force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that guy killed ISIS. He was a professional anti-ISIS fighter. That guy, and the same with Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah, who the United States demonizes. Again, very, very, very anti-ISIS. Right? People just don't understand. People have it in their minds that everyone in the Middle East are all the same. And I remember that. I totally remember that. When the USA went to invade Iraq after 9/11, everyone at my school thought that Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were the same. And I was like, no, they're not. One is a secular leader, an Arab nationalist. The other is, they fought against each other in the Iraq-Iran war. The Saudis and Saddam hate each other. I mean, I was like, they're not allies. But everyone's just like, oh, all them Arabs are the same. Don't you know that? All those Muslims are all the same. I mean, it's like this ignorance, right? It's just this racist ignorance, right? The fact that George W. Bush, right, put 9/11 truth and any questions you have about 9/11 aside. The fact that George W. Bush could convince the American people that it was necessary to invade Iraq and overthrow the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Iraqi Arab Republic of Iraq, because a guy from Saudi Arabia who is a Wahhabi, it was racism. I mean, it's just racism. I mean, it's just ignorance, right? I mean, that would be like, Canada attacked a country, so somebody invaded the United States. Well, it's all the same over there, right? They're all like Western people. They all wear blue jeans. They all watch television. They all have smartphones. They're all the same, right? That's kind. That's what it would be like, right? If the United States was accused of attacking a country and they invaded Australia, right? And it's like they'd be like, that's a completely different country. No, it's not. It's a majority white country, and they all go bowling, and I bet they eat hamburgers in Australia. It's all the same. No, it's not all the same, right? The entire Arab world is not all the same. Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden couldn't have been further apart politically, but they're all the same. They're all a bunch of Muslims. I mean, it made me so mad. That made me so mad. But that's the way these things go. I mean, that's how these things work, and people were just terrified. Saddam Hussein is a Muslim, right? He's a terrorist, right? Isn't he tied to some terrorist group, right? And it's like, no. But it was really, really disturbing. Yeah, I mean, when I was in Iran, I remember when I was in the graveyard in Iran, I saw families gathering to bury their relatives who died on the battlefields of Syria fighting ISIS, right? Revolutionary Guards who died. They would have tea set up by the grave site as they're kind of like digging the grave, and the family would kind of gathered around in preparation for the funeral service. And I remember they had me talk to some of these families. I had a translator with me, and I spoke with Iranians who lost their sons on the battlefield against ISIS. And the conversations I had with them, they didn't say, F you, American. No, it was, isn't it? I mean, why can't we get along here? Don't we have a common bond? That's what the Iranians said to me. They said, we hate ISIS. You hate ISIS. We hate Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. You hate Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Why are we fighting with each other? Why are Iran and America not allies, right? The terrorists want to kill us both. Well, the answer to that is that Wall Street doesn't give a flying F about you, right? Wall Street, the Pentagon, Trump, Joe Biden, they don't give a flying F about you. They don't want to keep you safe from terrorists. No, they want to overthrow nationalist and anti-imperialist states like Iran, like Syria, like Venezuela. That's what they're concerned about. Do they want to keep you safe from terrorism? No, they don't care about that. They don't care about that. What? Keep you safe from terrorism? That would mean they would have to stop giving money to Saudi Arabia. They're biggest oil supplier. And they would have to stop selling weapons to the Saudis, their biggest weapons purchaser. They would lose money. Are you kidding? Oh, wow. Oh, are you kidding? They keep you safe from terrorism. Oh, that's a silly notion that you've got. Keep you safe from terrorism. What is this? What do you think we are? You think we actually do our jobs? I mean, this is how disgusting it is. And I think that a lot of people in the Pentagon know this. Tulsi Gabbard represented a much bigger milieu than herself. I am convinced, right? That Tulsi Gabbard, when she ran for president, she's not a socialist, not a leftist, not an anti-imperialist. Her views, with India, and there's plenty to criticize Tulsi Gabbard over. But as I talk about in the new book on Kamala Harris, Tulsi Gabbard represented something bigger than herself, right? She represented a faction within the U.S. deep state that didn't buy this, that just didn't buy this, right? I'll never forget when I was at a hands-off Syria rally in 2013, and I was in Washington, D.C., marching up the street with a couple hundred people, and somebody walked up to me, and it was this woman, right? I can't confirm it was who she was. She said, I'm an Arab translator for the FBI, and I want you to know that I agree with you. And I said, really? And she said, yep. And she said, I translate Arab and Arab language, and I've seen these anti-Assad rallies, and they're not chanting down with Assad. They're not chanting freedom. They're chanting death to the Christians. They're chanting death to Alawites. They're chanting expel the Christians, death to the Alawites. She said, it's disgusting that America is supporting these people. And this was an FBI person, supposedly. It could have been anybody, right? You never know. There's crazy people walking around. But that moment, and I don't talk to, they always say, they knock on your door, you don't talk to them. But that moment where somebody walked up to me and said that was a moment where I realized that within the power structure, there was a disagreement. There was a disagreement about what was going on. And then you'll remember when Obama announced He was going, it was September 2013, he was going to send those missiles to Syria. All of a sudden, the internet was full of these anonymous pictures of U.S. military people. Do you remember that? They couldn't show their faces because it would be a violation. All these U.S. military people were saying they wouldn't go along with it and denouncing it. And they would cover up their faces, but you could see the uniform. It was all over social media. All these military personnel were saying they wouldn't do it. You remember that? That was big. That was very, very big. And it was, and Obama was just about to send those missiles over this alleged chemical attack, which we now know probably is not what happened, but, U.S. media was just announcing, hey, chemical attack, Assad must have done it, bomb Syria. And Hillary Clinton was telling Obama to bomb Syria, and Samantha Power was telling Obama to bomb Syria, and the Hillary Clinton State Department was ready to launch World War III, and Russia was saying, hey, you are not going to attack our ally in Syria. And Iran was saying, hey, yeah, we'll step up to defend our ally in Syria. And it was like we were on the brink of World War III. We were on the brink of something that really could have really lasted badly. For 3 months in Iran, American hospitality was everywhere. Yeah, we'll talk about 1979 Iran. Right. And at that moment, Obama made a deal. You remember that? Obama and John Kerry, they made a deal where Syria turned over its chemical weapons to the UN, to the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. That was a crazy moment. That was a very, very crazy moment. But I really do believe Tulsi Gabbard represented something bigger than herself, that within the FBI, within the CIA, within the Pentagon, there are a lot of people who are smart enough and speak Arabic and know what's going on and know that we aren't fighting a war on terror. We're fighting a war on independent socialist and nationalist governments. And that realization on their part has got to drive them crazy. And Trump pandered to those people during the election. You remember when Trump was up there? Hillary Clinton literally created ISIS, you remember that? That was, Trump pandered to those people. He wanted to get their support. And there were a lot of people who thought that Trump might be more anti-imperialist. And Trump talked more anti-imperialist on the campaign trail. He hasn't done it. There's nothing anti-imperialist about ripping up the INF treaty, right? That's the thing. Trump is supposed to be a Russian puppet, right? He's supposed to be working for the Putin, for the Russians. Why would he rip up the INF treaty? Right, a treaty that basically prevented an arms race, right? It was at the end of the Cold War. They signed the INF treaty, which is a treaty that says, we're not going to be building bigger missiles. Why in the world would Trump rip up the INF treaty and, threaten Russia with a new arms race if he was working for Russia, right? Why would Trump kill Qasem Soleimani, one of the most prominent military leaders, probably the most prominent military leader in Iran, a country that's very friendly to Russia? Why would Trump try to overthrow the Venezuelan government a bunch of times and stage, coups in Venezuela, a country that's aligned with Russia? I'm just not buying it. I'm not buying it. Why would Trump send lethal weapons to Ukraine if he's aligned with Russia, right? Trump is not anti-imperialist. Now some people argue, Rand Paul has argued, and others have argued that Donald Trump, he's the only president we've had who didn't start a new war in a long time, and that Trump, on some level, is like pushing back against some of this. I don't know. And that's what the Republicans said. That's what the Republicans who spoke at the Democratic National Convention, that's what they said. That's the argument. That's why you're supposed to vote for Biden, is Trump. And that's what James Mattis, do you remember this? Secretary of Defense James Mattis, when he resigned as Secretary of Defense, what did he say? He said that I believe Russia and China and all these countries are so bad. We have a commander in chief. What did he say? He said it doesn't agree with this or something. He said Trump doesn't agree with the geopolitical analysis of the United States. He doesn't agree that Russia, China, and North Korea, and Iran, and Venezuela are they said that was James Mattis' critique. Now we also know now, thanks to Bob Woodward's revelations, by the way, let me add, that James Mattis apparently went to the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, before he resigned. And he said that, quote, collective action might be necessary to remove Donald Trump. Collective action. Interesting. Now, people are saying, well, that refers to that constitutional mechanism where the president becomes brain dead and then the cabinet gets to get the Secretary of Defense, Mad Dog Mattis. You think Mad Dog Mattis, General Mad Dog Mattis, you think he goes to the Director of National Intelligence and he says, I want collective action against Trump? You think he's referring to an obscure constitutional procedure. That's what he's referring to. Yes, of course, right? Mad Dog Mattis, right? You know, who drops the mother of all bombs on people. Shock and awe. Mr. Shock and awe. He's into like Robert's Rules of Order, right? I mean, he's sitting there with his Robert's Rules of Order and he's developing like tactical maneuvers. He's the nerd guy at the meeting who's like, that is not a point of order. That is a point of personal privilege. That is not a point of order, okay? A point of order is, no, kid you not, right? So James Mattis was talking about collective action against Donald Trump with Dan Coates, the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI. So think about it. That's where the United States is at this time. That is where the United States is at this time. The United States is in a situation where I mean, the military is possibly, maybe hinting they might remove the president, right? The allegation coming out of the Democrat convention is that the president is not warlike enough. The president has been very warlike and has been monstrous in his warlike activities. Meanwhile, we've got Kamala Harris, right? I mean, voting for Joe Biden is voting for Kamala Harris at this point. And Kamala Harris is the Hillary Clinton State Department. Kamala Harris, a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. A vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for global chaos and regime change. It's a vote for the Hillary Clinton State Department. It's a vote for a new Arab Spring. It's a vote for unleashing chaos and death all over the world. That's why I'm not going to vote for Biden. I'm not going to vote for Trump either. I mean, voting for Trump, you think I'm going to vote for anti-immigrant bigotry? Do you think I'm going to vote for police brutality and rejecting and demonizing anti-police brutality protesters? No. Do you think I'm going to vote for a man who believes in torture? Right? Do you think I'm going to vote for a man who says that America will never be a socialist country? You know, I mean, do you think I'm going to vote for a guy who says that Ilhan Omar should be deported from the country just because she believes in socialism? Has the crowds chanting "Send her back, send her back"? I mean, Trump basically, when he's doing that, he basically announces he wants a totalitarian state where if you disagree with American capitalism, you're forcibly removed from the country. That's what they want. You think I'm going to vote for that? No, I'm not going to vote for Trump, who is dangerous and demagogic and racist. I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden because that's a de facto vote for Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris wants global chaos, revolution, and death, and she's representing a very, very dangerous faction. And I don't intend to vote for either candidate. There are some people who feel Joe Biden's better than Trump. I don't feel that way. I respect people who do. I think it's a legit position to take. For people that really understand what we're talking about, they assess the facts differently than I do. If you're one of those people who says that every tanky and anyone who defends Cuba or China is just the same as Hitler, and somehow you're going to vote for Joe Biden, I have no respect for you. But if you're somebody who says, look, I'm a legit anti-imperialist, in my view, Biden is the lesser of two evils, I can respect that viewpoint. I just don't agree with it, and I've been very clear about that. But yeah, folks, look, I mean, we need populism. We need workers' power. And so I think, I've been talking on here a long time. I guess the ISIS, Iran, Middle East stuff got me fired up. But I actually did agree that I was going to talk to you all. I was going to read you a section. So I am going to read you. This is an essay that was published, that I wrote, that was published on the internet. It was published by Mint Press. And interestingly enough, it was picked up by Popular Resistance, which is the website associated. I don't know if people know, there's a very important anti-imperialist activist named Kevin Zees, who recently died. Kevin Zees. and he was part of the embassy protectors in D.C. And his website that he and Margaret Flowers put together, they had a website called Popular Resistance. And on that website, I think they still have it, they actually published this article that I wrote called Populism, a Forgotten American Tradition. So I am going to, in a way to kind of honor Kevin Z's, right? Because, I mean, it was a sudden loss. I didn't think the guy was going to die. I mean, it was very, very sudden. It was just out of the blue, right? I know David Graeber, the Occupy Wall Street anarchist philosopher, also passed away recently. So in honor of him and in honor of, talking about what populism actually is, and in honor of talking about what populism isn't, I'm actually going to read this essay. Now, the essay comes out of my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, right? This is my book that I published, an oldie but a goodie. And it's one of my better essays, I think. I mean, I did a lot of research to put this piece together, and it's called Populism, A Forgotten American Tradition, published February 2nd, 2017. So here we go. Donald Trump's ascendancy to the White House involved endless appeals to the people and denunciations of the elite. During an October rally, for example, Trump said, quote, "It's a global power structure that is responsible for the economic decisions that have robbed our working class, stripped our country of its wealth, and put that money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations and political entities." His inauguration speech was laced in similar rhetoric. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of the country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. That changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. Populism is defined as political rhetoric championing the common person, the working class, or the disenfranchised. While in the present period, populism is associated with right-wing nationalism, the history of populism has shifted and evolved throughout U.S. history. Right-wing populism in the 21st century is just the latest incarnation of quite a diverse trend. "You are a worker," a widely read pamphlet begins. "One nice morning, you are told your services are no longer needed. In plain words, you are fired. You are thrown out. The employer has no more work for you. He cuts operations or shuts his plant altogether. While you remain without a livelihood, he goes to the country estate or abroad to have a good time. And yet, come to think of it, you are not a stranger to this factory or mill or shop. You and the like of you built it. You and the like of you created all the machinery, all the raw material, all the fuel which is necessary to run the industry. It is your blood, your sweat, your muscle, and your brain that is sunk into every piece of goods produced. You have as much a stake in this establishment your whole life. It's yours more than the owner's. It's part of your very self. Has it ever occurred to you that such a state of affairs is wrong?" This isn't from a Donald Trump speech. This isn't from an alt-right rant against globalism. The above text comes from Why Communism? Plain Talk on Vital Issues, published in 1933 by Moishe J. Olgan, a leader of the New York City branch of the Communist Party. The Communist Party and the unemployed councils it directed involved hundreds of thousands of working-class people, black and white, both native-born and immigrants. Together, they stopped evictions. Later in the decade, they organized industrial unions in a wave of sit-down strikes. With slogans like "Fight or Starve," they pushed the Roosevelt administration to create many key reforms, such as Social Security, unemployment insurance, food assistance, and the Works Progress Administration. Olgan and the Communist Party's methods of agitation were not new in 1933. A generation prior, the activist, union leader, and Socialist Party presidential candidate Eugene Debs had traveled across the country on a bright red train car, making similar arguments. Prior to the United States' entrance into World War I, the Socialist Party was a mass political formation that received over 900,000 votes, roughly 6% of the popular vote in the 1912 presidential election. However, the political discourse is quite different today. When I was in Wheeling, West Virginia in November, just after the election, I met a former steelworker who preferred to remain anonymous. He told me how angry he was at the closing of the steel mills and the deindustrialization of his hometown. He told me he had voted for Donald Trump because, quote, the Democrats don't care about working people anymore. Now they are a bunch of socialists. The local United Steelworkers chapter had apparently agreed with him. Local 2911 parted ways with the national leaders of the union and endorsed Trump. An entire issue of Foreign Affairs, the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, was dedicated to the power of populism. The cover was donned with Grant Wood's famous American Gothic painting, showing a rural American couple, husband clutching a pitchfork. The text of the publication describes a global confrontation between populism and the open international system. Extensive analysis of 1930s fascism is included, and an article on Latin America describes Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet and Bolivian President Evo Morales as populists and equates them with each other. It is subtly sifting into the American consciousness that the talk of the working class and the common people is inherently right-wing, while talk of racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression or intolerance is associated with the political left. Concerns about those who suffer on a class basis are now being labeled right-wing. Left-wing voices describe Trump supporters as ignorant and inform us that educated people are anti-racist. Meanwhile, observers say Trump is transforming the Republicans into a party of the working class. The concept of the political left can trace its roots back to the French Revolution. The seating in the National Assembly was politically arranged, with the most radical sections sitting on the left. Leftism emerged as a continent-wide current with the Spring of Nations in 1848. Communism and socialism emerged as the most powerful ideological currents in a movement that encouraged the working class, or the proletariat, to rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie, the owners of the banks and factories. Can any political ideology be more populist than this? The political left saw racism, sexism, and national chauvinism as methods by which the rich divide the working people and prevent them from rising up. With slogans like "Workers of the World Unite," were employed. The first communist seizure of power in 1871 was done under very nationalistic auspices. The workers of Paris saw the French state surrendering to foreign invaders. The Paris Commune was created as working class people waved the red, white, and blue flag and sought to defend the gains and ideals of the French Revolution from the Prussian invaders. The Republican Party certainly has populist roots, but this populism had a left-wing character. The very name Republican was taken from the various uprisings throughout Europe in the 1800s, in which republicanism was the battle cry. The Republican Party emerged as the party of small farmers who opposed slavery, known as the Free Soilers. It was the party of religious abolitionists and labor unions. The slogan was "Free land, free labor, and free men." In the 1860s, New York City's Republican Party-aligned newspaper was the New York Tribune, whose London correspondent was none other than socialist influential thinker Karl Marx. August Willich and Joseph Weydemeyer, key leaders of the Union Army during the Civil War, served openly as members of Marx's International Working Men's Association. In the 1864 presidential election, the global Marxist movement put its support behind Abraham Lincoln. Following the Civil War, the radical Republicans were considered the far left of American politics. They advocated racial equality and supported Reconstruction. Republican President Ulysses S. Grant sent federal troops to fight the Ku Klux Klan and even worked to restrict atrocities against Native Americans in the Western Territories. As the Republican Party moved away from the radical politics of its origins, what is commonly called the Populist Movement emerged with the People's Party, being formed during the 1890s. These were small-scale farmers, labor activists, feminists, and others who wanted to advance the fight for social equality. The populists called for nationalization of railroads, public control of banking, and other left-wing economic measures. Many populists condemned racism and lynching, while others openly embraced it. The populist upsurge included Henry George, known as a radical social reformer when he ran for mayor of New York in 1886. The Socialist Labor Party, led by Daniel De Leon, and eventually the much larger Socialist Party of America, emerged from this political upsurge. The Anti-Imperialist League of 1898 was a mass populist anti-war organization that opposed U.S. war with Spain. Until the 1930s, populism was shunned by those on the far right. The father of the European far right wing was Oswald Spengler. His text, The Decline of the West, was considered the ideological basis for Nazism, Italian fascism, and other mass right-wing movements of the 20th century. Spengler's writings describe the need for a tightly organized society in which everyone is assigned a place, authority is sacred, and traditions are unquestioned. He saw mass popular movements as a sign of societal decay. Julius Evola, the widely influential Italian right-wing ideologue, held similar sentiments. As Marxism and class struggle arose in Europe, those on the far right studied ancient civilizations in India, Tibet, and elsewhere, hoping to discover a traditionalist antidote to social chaos. Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco adopted populist language in the 1930s, seeing it as a way to compete with mass socialist and communist movements. At this point, 1/5 of the planet was living under a Marxist-Leninist government in the Soviet Union. Breaking with the anti-populism and elitism of the right wing, fascists portrayed the left as a plot by Russia to take over the world. Economic theories like National Socialism and corporatism were seen as a way to correct the problems of capitalism, but not surrender to the, quote, menace of Bolshevism. Hitler's banker, John White's 1997 biography of Nazi economist and banker Hjalmar Schacht, describes how even, writing it down. Describes how, White's quote, start at the beginning of the sentence. John White's 1997 biography of the Nazi economist and banker Hjalmar Schacht describes how even as Hitler was emerging in the 1920s, the European right wing was uncomfortable with the populism of the Nazi Party. White quotes Paul Hindenburg, German President Paul Hindenburg, as commenting, "There's too much red on that flag," when seeing the Nazi Party colors. As fascists took power, it became pretty clear that National Socialism theory was largely a fiction. In the famous Night of the Long Knives, Hitler purged the Nazi Party of the more socialistic elements. Figures like Ernst Röhm and Gregor Strasser, who seemed to emphasize the populist rhetoric, were executed. The economic changes brought about by Hitler's revolution, in quotes, involved a lot of military spending, the construction of the Autobahn highways, a refusal to pay back foreign debts, and not much else. The industries were not nationalized, though private corporations like Volkswagen certainly benefited from the free labor of prisoners held in concentration camps. The mass militant German labor movement was crushed, and workers were forced to join government-controlled unions that were forbidden to go on strike. The bulk of Germany's wealthy capitalist class, families such as the Krupps, I saw it, I wrote it down, Huey Long, I saw it, The bulk of Germany's wealthy capitalist class, families such as the Krupps, Tysons, and Schachts, never had their property confiscated. Private bankers continued to enrich themselves. There was really nothing socialist about National Socialism, aside from some of the pre-1933 rhetoric. In the United States, the largest mass fascist organization, the Ku Klux Klan, never really raised economic populist demands. Its base was rural whites who preached rabid racism, anti-communism, and anti-unionism. It upheld the sacredness of private property amid its xenophobia. Among urban anti-communist Catholics in the 1930s, the Silver Legion of America, the Black Legion, the German American Bund, and a bizarre variety of attempts to create a fascist party were carried out. None of these groups were able to gain much traction. A cult novelist, William Dudley Pillay, he formed an American fascist organization called the Silver Legion of America, which focused on anti-Semitism while glorifying Mussolini's Italy. Father Charles Coughlin's radio broadcasts contained rants about the immorality of capitalism, but always insisted that the answer was a revival of Christianity, not economic reforms. Dreamer of the day, Kevin Coogan's 1999 biography of the fascist ideologue Francis Parker Yockey emphasizes how uncomfortable many on the far right were with any form of populism. From Oswald Spengler to Julius Evola, the right wing loved authority, order, tradition, obedience, and stability. Class struggle, even waged in the name of nationalism and Christianity, created extreme discomfort for those on the right. The major populist voices during the 1930s were not right-wing fascists or nationalists, but socialists and communists. William Z. Foster campaigned for president in 1932 on a platform of building a Soviet America in which everyone was guaranteed a job, housing, and education. The Communist Party grew to be a major player in American politics during this period. Foster's campaign won over 103,000 votes in the 1932 election, despite being banned from the ballot in many southern states for advocating racial equality. Foster was arrested scores of times throughout the campaign, and even described being tortured for hours by the Los Angeles Police Department in his memoir, Pages from a Worker's Life. After the campaign, he fled to the Soviet Union to recover from the extreme physical stress of being arrested nearly 100 times within the span of just a few months. During this time, many well-known figures like Charlie Chaplin, Lillian Hellman, John Steinbeck, Richard Wright, and Paul Robeson joined or worked closely with the massive left-wing populist organization known as the Communist Party. Starting in 1935, communists began emphasizing American patriotism, downplaying the idea that they were agents of Moscow, and arguing that Presidents Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington might be members of the Communist Party if they were still alive. After World War II, populism became kind of a derogatory term in American discourse. Films like All the King's Men showed appeals to the common man against the elites as a dangerous demagogic ploy. Books like Anthem by Ayn Rand and 1984 by George Orwell glorified the individual and portrayed communism and fascism as being cut from the same cloth, totalitarian mass movements that suppressed individual liberty. Alabama Governor George Wallace, the racist right-wing four-time presidential candidate who appealed to Southern whites as working-class people and opposed the anti-war and civil rights movements, was deemed to be a populist and denounced by the leaders of both parties. In the 1970s, the Republican Party adopted some of Wallace's rhetorical style, including his appeal to common people against cultural elites who preached anti-racism and social justice. Much has been written about the Southern strategy employed by Republicans, firing up the white working class people into a backlash against civil rights, and how it contained populistic overtones. While the right wing toyed with populism during the Cold War, the political left moved away from the messaging style that had defined the Communist Party in the 1930s and the Roosevelt administration. Herbert Marcuse, the well-known Marxist academic of the Frankfurt School, argued that intellectuals, not the working class, were the makers of history. In May of 1970, New York City witnessed the Hard Hat riots, in which construction workers attacked anti-war protesters, decrying the left as being middle class and unpatriotic. In this atmosphere, the Weatherman faction of Students for a Democratic Society and other new leftists argued that white Americans were inherently right-wing and complicit in the crimes of American imperialism. They sought to organize white middle-class counterculture youth to align with the Black Panthers. One of the anthems of the Weather People songbook, I'm Dreaming of a White Riot, which is actually, it's interesting. It was apparently to the tune of I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas, ends with the couplet, may you learn to struggle and fight, or the world will off you because you're white. Or, if you want to sing it, may you learn to struggle and fight, or else the world will off you because you're white. Anyway, Bing Crosby is turning in his grave. While the Weatherman approach was less academic, works like Jay Sakai's book Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, and Zach Cope's more recent book, Divided World, Divided Class, put forward the position that white Americans are not workers at all, but exploiters of the third world with no revolutionary potential. During the Cold War, the U.S. left seemed to appeal to a kind of alienation among nonconformists than to actual economic suffering. While certain Marxist-Leninist groups will raise slogans like Make the Rich Pay and A Job is a Right, to many leftists even today, anti-capitalism is a synonym for anti-consumerism. Radicals and revolutionaries are those who have figuratively taken the red pill in the 2000 film The Matrix. The solution to the problems of capitalism is socially conscious shopping and ecology, not organizing the working class against the rich and fighting to seize control of the means of production. Senator Bernie Sanders' campaign was a rare moment in recent U.S. history. Sanders, who openly called himself a socialist, was a serious contender for the presidency. He spoke against the billionaire class and called for a political revolution by the common people, not against gay marriage or flag burning, but against government policies that favor the ultra-rich. Oddly, articles in U.S. media compared Bernie Sanders to Eugene Debs. While both had a left-wing populist appeal, Debs called for an entirely new economic system in which the economy was centrally planned. Sanders merely called for free college and education and universal health care, paid for with corporate and capital gains taxes. With Sanders out of the race, the longtime establishment figure Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee, many white working-class Sanders supporters voted for Trump, especially in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. To many distracted white workers, populism was all that mattered, whether it had a leftist or a right-wing appeal. They were against the rich and the elites. They supported whomever appeared to be the most opposed to them. But will Trump secure populism's place on the political right? Is left-wing populism dead? Was Sanders' campaign a meaningless outlier? A lot of this depends on what Trump is able to achieve, not in terms of deportations and police repression, but in terms of reviving the economy. If Trump is able to vastly improve the living standards among white working-class people, especially in the Rust Belt, right-wing nationalist populism will most likely become a long-standing staple of American politics. The political left practically invented populism, but since the dawn of the Cold War, Socialism, communism, and anti-capitalism have been considered to be largely middle-class bohemian trends. However, the changing face of American politics could reverse this. Figures who speak like William Z. Foster, Eugene Debs, or Daniel DeLeon, and rally workers of all different races to fight for their livelihoods and to oppose wars, racism, and empire could reemerge. The future character of populism in America is quite unclear, but the next 4 years are likely to be quite definitive for it. That was my essay published in 2017, February of 2017, just after Trump was elected. The Forgotten Populism, a Forgotten American Tradition. And it's published in my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. One of my most important essays. I've read it on lives before. I felt like reading it once again. All right, folks. So now I'm going to start answering your super chats. Thank you for the applause. All righty. Oh, no, I got to do the roll call. Roll call first. So, names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you. Then I'll answer the super chats. All right. Who's with me? Who's here? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's here? Mike Bendito is in Paradise. Will DeMarco, Pennsylvania. Daniel in Los Angeles, Ontario. Mike Bendito is in Andre, Auckland, New Zealand. Australia, Belize. Bennett Lloyd in New York City, Queens. Wilmington, California. Roll Calm. Future USSA. Pennsylvania, says Dust James. Oakland, California. Somewhere USA. Azores Islands. Logan Hodge, Texas. Buffalo, New York, Marissa. JT24, Vicksburg. Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Vallejo, California. Calvin from Saskatoon. Nashville, Tennessee. Long Island, New York. Ho Chi Minh City. Arizona. David, Italy. Missouri. San Jose. Bill Preston in the United States. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us tonight? Non-user was in San Jose. Ooh. Barely Awake in Munich. Chandler in Georgia. Kenny in Malaysia. Moscow, Russia. Brisbane, Australia. Joanne in the Netherlands. Rio de Janeiro. Cairo, Egypt. A FEMA camp. Captain Waffles in Florida. Katz in Florida. Sasha in Bangkok. Oakland, California. Balthazar, home of the Panthers. Toronto. Denver, Finland. Lafayette, Louisiana. Rio de Janeiro. Salt Lake City. Will Caitlin from Long Island. Will and Caitlin from Long Island. Welcome. Sam Levin in Los Angeles. Mohsin from Iran. Northern Kinda Smoky, California. Mo in Pomona, California. Who is with us, folks? Cleveland. Pirate Alex. Melbourne, Australia. John Doe. San Francisco. Who else is with us? If I missed your name, just put it in again. Fallbrook, California. Palo, Round Mountain, California. Solidarity from Florida. Caleb, says Harold Sullivan. Solidarity right back at you, Harold. Uranus, the planet. Mount Doom, Morador. Okay. God bless you, Master Frodo. The moon, ha ha ha, says Alex. Very good. Very, very good. All right. Who else is with us? Who else is with us tonight? State your name or forever hold your peace. Be safe in California, Oregon, and Washington. That's about the fires. Paragus, Los Angeles. Brazil, says Ryan Andrike. Richmond, Virginia, says Hernan Montoya. Very good. Very, very good. I have no friends in California. Ontario. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York. Grand Junction. San Antonio, Texas. Redonda, Brazil. Volta Redonda, Brazil. Yorba Linda. I don't know what that means. Los Angeles. Los Angeles, Diego Fernandez. Neoliberal hell, says Svet. All right. Color Revolution from Thailand. Richmond, Virginia. Bourgeois, Scotland. Land of the SNP. Who else is with us tonight? Yorba Linda in the city of California. Good call, Sasha. Alrighty. Alrighty. All right, folks. Now we're going to start hammering out your super chats. Thank you for your patience. All right, Daniel DeLeon. Daniel DeLeon was a professor at Columbia University in like the 1880s. Um, and he supported Henry George when Henry George ran for mayor of New York. Henry George was not a Marxist. Henry George was an economic reformer. He favored nationalizing and taxing land values. Henry George was a well-known kind of progressive economist who was very critical of capitalism, but was not a Marxist. And when he ran for mayor of New York City, the Marxist movement supported Henry George. Daniel DeLeon supported Henry George. Daniel DeLeon was a Marxist professor, so he was fired from Columbia University for that. After that, Daniel DeLeon launched the Socialist Labor Party, the SLP. Their symbol was the arm and hammer, the arm holding a hammer, the SLP. And originally, the SLP was part of the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, but they wanted it to be a propaganda organization. They didn't believe in actually organizing workers. They said that the answer was not labor unions, it was socialist revolution. So the IWW kicked them out. That's why the IWW has a non-political clause. They don't affiliate with any political parties because of the SLP. And Daniel DeLeon was a very good writer and a very good speaker, and he went around writing and speaking and promoting Marxism in the United States. He was one of the main popularizers of Marxism. Now, from what I understand, Frederick Engels did not really like him, and that he was very much an ultra-leftist and a little bit of a demagogue. People compare him to, Bob Avakian or something. I mean, that's not fair, I think, but he was much more of a mass organizer than the RCP or anything. But he was very much, his members, if you remember the SLP, you weren't allowed to join a labor union because labor unions were not the answer, only socialism was. They took some positions that put them at odds with the rest of the working class. For example, there was a mass movement in the 1890s against trusts, big trusts, corporate trusts. And the SLP famously said they supported trusts because it would be easier to nationalize them after the revolution. So there was this big mass movement saying, mobilizing against big corporations. And instead of joining it, the SLP said, no, we're for trusts and monopolies because then it'll be easier to nationalize. So they took some ultra-leftist positions. I believe they did end up supporting the USA invading Cuba in the Spanish-American War, but then some people say they didn't, so I've heard mixed things. But yeah, they were the SLP. They swerved a little bit ultra left. But that was in response to the movement in the 1890s as capitalism began moving toward its imperialist stage. There was a period of stabilization in the United States, and that kind of threw the Marxist movement for a loop. You had the rise also of Samuel Gompers, right? Samuel Gompers had been a Marxist, and he sold out and became the head of the AFL and became a cheap business unionist, a racist. He barred black people from joining unions. Samuel Gompers started out as a Marxist and became a reformist. Daniel DeLeon started out as a Marxist and he called himself an impossibilist. That was what he called his ideology, impossibilism. He said it was impossible to improve workers' conditions under capitalism, so it was necessary, only a revolution would work, and his vision of industrial socialism was a little bit different. That was the SLP, and they didn't like Debs. They were very critical of Eugene Debs. They called Eugene Debs a phony. They were kind of ultra-leftists, but they played a very important role in popularizing American Marxism. They had soapbox speakers on street corners, and they had a newspaper called The People, which was widely read. And Daniel DeLeon was very, very good at getting publicity for himself. I think he went to one of the big churches in New York City on Sunday morning, and I think he stood up on a pew and challenged the priest to a debate about Jesus and socialism. I think that was a very famous thing that Daniel DeLeon did. He would do theatrical things like that. He was very, very big on promoting socialist ideology. They published Marx's works and widely distributed it. They made a great contribution. I think Daniel DeLeon, William Z. Foster sums up Daniel DeLeon's contribution in his History of the Communist Party. And he says the man was a bit of an ultra-leftist, but he made his contribution. And I think that's true. I think Daniel DeLeon, yes, he was a bit of an ultra-leftist. He was mainly a propagandist. He didn't really do very much building of a mass movement, but he did make a very big contribution. If he hadn't educated Eugene Debs and other people, if he hadn't been out there screaming that only socialism was the answer, a lot of the people who came later wouldn't have been able to form the mass organizations that they needed to form. So he did it. He played a very, very important role. I have a great deal of respect for Daniel DeLeon. Though I don't agree with him on a lot of things. One of his quotes, He said, "The red flag makes no bones about its true purpose." I like that. The red flag makes no bones about its true purpose. All right. All right. So now, totally different super chat. The Communist Party of the Philippines. What is their role in the South China Sea? Well, the Communist Party of the Philippines was, it was formed. It was, I mean, I mean, let's back up. Okay, so obviously there was like the pro-Soviet Communist Party of the Philippines, but then the organization that now calls itself the Communist Party of the Philippines, which is it is, a designated foreign terrorist organization, along with the New People's Army, along with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. They're all considered to be the same group. They control a number of islands in the Philippines, and I think they've broken into some different factions. Probably one of the main factions is led by Jose Maria Sison, or they call him Joma Sison, and he's in exile in the Netherlands. And they're Maoists. They were supported by China and aligned with China in the 60s and 70s. China cut off its support to them. Their position is that they oppose both China and the United States. They say that China is capitalist and social imperialist, and they fight for the people of the Philippines. They control a number of islands. They are in favor of gay marriage, and they practice gay marriage on the islands that they control. They have gay marriage. And they're a communist tendency. That's what they are. And they control a number of islands, and they have an armed group, the New People's Army, and they have territory, and they're Maoists. They call themselves Marxist-Leninist Maoists, but they support Cuba. They're friendly to Cuba. They had a positive assessment of the Bolivarian movement, so they weren't as ultra-left as some of the other Maoists were. They supported Duterte when he first ran for president, and they supported him, and actually, interestingly, Jose Maria Sison, who is their leader in exile, was a philosophy professor at one point, and Duterte was one of his students. I think that's a wild story, isn't it? Right? So Duterte, the current president of the Philippines, was actually the student of Jose Maria Sison, the leader of the Maoists, who are now in exile. And originally, there was kind of a lot of hope among the Maoists that when Duterte got elected, that he would end the war, and that was the hope, and that Duterte even appointed a known member of the illegal Communist Party of the Philippines to his cabinet originally, and there were peace talks, and that there was hope that some kind of deal would be reached where he would recognize the Maoist control over the islands they control, and there would be a peace treaty signed between the government and the New People's Army. That did not happen, and Duterte launched a number of illegal detentions, and there was a lot of violence following Duterte's taking of leadership. Now the Communist Party of the Philippines, from what I understand, hates Duterte and considers Duterte to be a fascist. But originally they were optimistic that there could be some kind of, they supported him originally, which I think is fascinating. As far as the South China Sea issue is concerned, okay, right? So China has a huge apparatus of production, right? I mean, they make more steel than any other country in the world, more copper than any other country in the world. They're the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. China's greatest weakness in terms of its economy is dependency on foreign oil. They can get some oil from Russia. They can get some oil from Saudi Arabia and other places, but they have to have oil come in. Now, some oil is able to come in from pipelines from Russia, but for the most part, the oil they get comes on oil tankers. And the oil tankers go to ports in Shanghai, and they go through the South China Sea. Every day, oil tankers go to Shanghai to deliver oil to the mainland, so China can continue to grind on producing steel and copper and cell phones and all kinds of stuff. If those ships going through the South China Sea were cut off, that would result in China's economy shutting down. And that is why China has militarized. They've been accused of militarizing the South China Sea. That's why they're doing it, because they want to make sure that those oil tankers never get stopped. That the United States, the United States is messing with them in Taiwan. The United States is messing with them in trade wars and stuff. They want to make sure the United States, which has its military all over the South China Sea, also never is able to cut off the oil supply, because that would destroy China. So the Philippines is in the South China Sea. And there have been some instances where some fishing boats from the Philippines have been messed with by the Chinese military. And Duterte was able to kind of resolve that. He was able to make a deal with China where the Philippines gets the fishing rights, right? China won't do any fishing, but China will have the right to have their military there. They kind of reached a deal. That was a good move, right? A lot of people are raising, well, why isn't China sending a bunch of guns and weapons to the Communist Party, the Philippine guerrilla forces? Well, first of all, they don't agree with each other. I mean, that's like the first reason, right? Is that I mean, the Communist Party of the Philippines, from what I understand, does not believe that China is a socialist country. It does not support China, right? And it calls for Chinese corporations to be driven out of the Philippines. So why would China give weapons to people who don't like them? Number one. Number two is that China is a socialist state. Okay? China is a socialist state trying to raise its people out of poverty and trying to build a socialist society. It's not Comintern. It's not spreading communism all over the world. That's not what China sees its role as doing. Now, in a way, Chinese investment was key in helping Bolivarianism to go forward. China is basically, pushing South Korea, I think, into a position where it favors, better relations with North Korea. It's largely Chinese influence that's doing that. It's doing it in a subtle way. But China made clear, I believe it was in the early 80s, 81, 82, the Chinese Communist Party proclaimed that class struggles in foreign countries are none of our business. And that was a necessary thing to do in order for China to get foreign investment, in order for China to continue to flourish on the international markets. They couldn't have the capitalists of the world thinking that China was trying to stage violent revolutions. And there were all these parties around the world, Maoist parties that had been aligned with China. And, it was necessary for China to make clear we don't want people going around the world doing, ultra-left adventurist acts of violence and being affiliated with us. We're going to get foreign investment. We need to be a real country. We can't be seen as a group spreading chaos and violence all over the world. China's position has been consistently that class struggles beyond their borders are not their business, right? And, not surprisingly, many of the Maoist groups around the world don't like China anymore. But what's interesting, though, is, the Maoists of Nepal. Nepal is another country in Asia, right, that was also, was led, it had a big Maoist insurgency in the 1990s, but they won. You'll remember that. The Communist Party of Nepal, they overthrew the king, and they joined the seven-party alliance, and they took power. And now, the communists of Nepal have all merged into one party, and the Maoists of Nepal, even though they were anti-China in the 90s, now they support China. And actually, there are whole centers in Nepal studying Xi Jinping thought. You should read about this. But with the help of China, the Nepal Maoists and communists, Marxist-Leninists, all of them have merged into one party, and China is building railroads through Nepal and bringing in foreign investment, and they've adjusted, right? And, does China support the communists of Nepal? Well, I don't know if they're giving them money, but they're very friendly to Nepal, and Nepal, it's the former Maoist. It's mainly former Maoist, but there's also the former United Marxist-Leninist Party. There's also the Worker and Peasants Party. There's a number of communist parties that merged into the ruling Communist Party of Nepal now, and China is very friendly to them. So these things are complicated. The other thing to keep in mind is that all kinds of groups get covert support from all kinds of people, right? That's the reality. You read the history of the Cold War Operation Gladio. In Italy, for example, the CIA gave money to Maoists, right, to go out and commit terrorist acts of ultra-left adventurism to scare the Italian public out of voting for the Communist Party. That's a fact, right? In Angola, the U.S. government gave money to Maoists to fight against the Soviet MPLA, right? All kinds of people have gotten covert support from all kinds of other people, right? So, who knows, right? I don't know anything really other than what I've read about the Communist Party of the Philippines. Are they getting foreign support? Maybe, but who knows who it's from, right? Maybe Duterte's enemies at this point are supporting them. Maybe people who were supporting Duterte at the beginning were supporting them. Maybe they weren't getting any foreign support. Maybe all their support was domestic, right? But when there's a prolonged armed struggle like that, different world powers tend to get involved for all kinds of spurious and different reasons. Let's not forget, for example, there's a very important book called Gangs and Counter-Gangs. It was written by a British intelligence official. where he talked about how in Kenya there was the Land and Freedom Army, the Mau Mau, right? And they staged this big uprising against the British, the Land and Freedom Army. And the British had a bit of a problem because they were white and their soldiers were white, and so they would go into a village or an area and fight the Land and Freedom Army or the Mau Mau, and they would fight them, and all the local people would sympathize with the Mau Mau and not sympathize with the white British troops. So they realized they had a bit of a problem. So what they did is they formed counter gangs. They would find, other dark-skinned Africans who hated the Mau Mau for ethnic reasons, or they would take Mau Mau prisoner and make a deal with them. And they would form a group of people who claimed to be, claimed to be anti-imperialist, claimed to hate the British, but hated the Mau Mau, right? And they would say, you're now the Kenyan Liberation Army. And, you're against British imperialism, of course, right? You hate British imperialism and all that, but you really hate the Mau Mau because they're a bunch of phonies, right, guys? They're a bunch of phonies. I bet the Mau Mau are agents of the Soviet imperialists, right, guys? I bet they have a Western Marxist ideology, right, that's anti-African, right? Got it? Right? I mean, that's what they did. That is what they did. Right? And it worked, right? And they all over the world, this kind of shit has gone on. I mean, in Ireland, right, to fight the IRA, right? The Sinn Féin, the Provos were like the main group. There was also the Irish National Liberation Army. But then it's been proven British intelligence was giving weapons to other Irish groups that fought against the Sinn Féin. And we're saying Sinn Féin were a bunch of phonies, right? And they're in Ireland. There were like some weird Maoist groups that were like neutral, that said the IRA were agents of the Soviets, and stuff like that. This is the world of when you have armed groups like this, little armed factions. They talk about fourth generation warfare and all of this, right? It gets so complicated and confusing, right? Where it's like there's all these little tiny groups that are, it's wild. It's really, really wild. It's really, really wild. You have no idea the elaborate amount of who's supporting who. And and a lot of these groups at the end of the day, well, they just have to get support from somebody, right? I mean, and that's the thing, right? If you're running an armed extremist group in some impoverished third world country, you got to get support from somebody, right? I mean, somebody comes along and says, here's, thousands of dollars in a suitcase and a bunch of AK-47s. You're going to go, great, whatever, and all over Africa, there was the history of the proxy wars, right? And there'd be a pro-Soviet group, there'd be a Chinese group, and then there'd be a U.S. group, and then sometimes the U.S. and the Chinese group and then there'd be groups that you couldn't tell who was supporting them, and they would work with one side for a little bit, and then they'd work with another side for a little bit, and that this is all, so, is the Communist Party of the Philippines getting any foreign support? Is the New People's Army getting any foreign support? How the hell should I know? I'm not up in the mountains with them. I don't know who could be delivering them suitcases and who could be giving them weapons. You don't know that, right? And so when people say, oh, why is this country not supporting them? They could be. You don't know that they're not. I mean, they could be, right? I mean, but maybe they aren't, right? Maybe the U.S. government doesn't like Duterte. Maybe they're supporting them. You don't know that that's not happening. I mean, it could be. I don't know that. Who knows? But the USA seems to like Duterte right now, right? I mean, so who knows, right? That in this murky armed struggles where there's a bunch of different armed factions, right? There's also Islamic insurgents in the Philippines. Don't forget that, right? There's Islamic insurgency going on there. These things are complicated. I don't know what point I'm making there. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that any country is supporting them. I'm not making that accusation. Please don't get me wrong. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when you're demanding that a certain government, why do they not arm this group? First of all, you don't know that they're not. Second of all kinds of countries support all kinds of groups for all kinds of crazy reasons that we find out about 50 years later when the documents get published, right? If you knew how many groups the U.S. government has supported and why, it would blow your mind. It would blow your mind, I was just reading in a book, a very interesting book, that during the May of 1968 uprising in Paris, in Spain, right? In France. In France, May of 1968, there was this huge uprising in France, right? And it was like the communists, and they brought down Charles de Gaulle, and it was a big thing. But the U.S. government was actively covertly supporting some of the communist groups there in Paris. Did you know that? And they were covertly supporting them because they wanted to ruin the peace talks, right? There were negotiations in Vietnam, in Paris, between the Vietnamese and the United States. And the United States was supporting some of the ultra-leftist groups that participated in the May of '68 events in the hopes that they could ruin the peace talks. That's been documented, that there were, Maoists and Trotskyists, but there were plenty of Maoists and Trotskyists who weren't getting supported by the U.S. government. But there were some Maoists and Trotskyists who were getting, covert support from the U.S. government in the hopes that they would do crazy stuff that would somehow ruin the peace talks between the United States and the Vietnamese in Paris. Right? I kid you not. Like, you have no idea. This kind of thing, when people get into this level of weirdness, right? Geopolitics and who's supporting. I mean, it's the elaborateness is very extreme. I think I've made my point, right? I hope I don't sound nuts there. I'm just telling you that there are many, many layers to all of this. All right. Okay, Monthly Review magazine, great magazine. It was started. It was Paul Sweezy, and right, they're the ones that published Albert Einstein's famous essay "Why Socialism," where Albert Einstein argues about the problems of capitalism. They had a publishing house, right? Not only did they publish, it was an intellectual journal. It's still around. I used to read it pretty regularly. I had a regular subscription that would come in the mail, and I would read it. I don't read it very much anymore. But I do remember when I did read Monthly Review. There's a lot of people. I mean, it's kind of an academic publication, but it's one of the few academic, like, socialist publications that's tanky. I mean, you can call it tanky. I mean, not everything is where I'm at, but I mean, they would run articles that they would defend Cuba, they would defend North Korea, they would have arguments. I think some of their writers are very anti-China, and some of their writers are pro-China. And they published a lot of stuff globally. They published articles by Amin Hussein, I believe, who was a very prominent Marxist scholar from Egypt. And they ran a lot of good stuff. And their publishing house, in the 60s and 70s, they published a lot of the pro-China books that would come out, like books about China, William Hinton's writings, and stuff. So yeah, they were, I mean, it's definitely I put it in the same category. There used to be a newspaper, the Monthly Review was it went in the same category. There was a newspaper, it's not around anymore, called the National Guardian. And neither of them really claimed to be a party, right? National Review and the Monthly Review and the National Guardian, both of them claimed to just kind of be a communist newspaper. They were just a communist newspaper, but they were Maoists. If you really got to know them, they were Maoists, and they tried to get the RCP and the October League to merge. They had the Guardian forums, they called it, and that they were a force. They were an intellectual current. In the 60s and 70s, and even up to today, Monthly Review is still around. I think at one point, they would have a monthly breakfast or something meeting, early in the morning, they'd have a breakfast where people would get together. But I don't think they do that anymore. In New York City, they used to have a monthly breakfast where they would have a breakfast someplace. And, I think a lot of people associated with Freedom Road Socialist Organization, they're in, the other one, it's now called Liberation Road. It used to be called Freedom Road, but now it's the breakaway. It's called Liberation Road. I think some of them are associated with it, if I'm not mistaken. It's a lot of people that are kind of left over from the new communist movement of the 70s, but it's very tied in with academia. It's academics who used to be in the new communist movement. They'll say good things about Mao. They'll say good things about the Cultural Revolution. They'll praise Cuba a little bit, and it's a review, right? Books will come out that are about mass incarceration or the economic crisis. It's a well put together publication. It's very professional. The people who put it out, I mean, I've learned a lot from it over the years. I haven't read it in a long time. I used to have a subscription. That was years ago. But yeah, that's Monthly Review. Yeah. I mean, it's part of the left forum culture. Right? Left forum. You go to the left forum and, there's Monthly Review, and there's a lot of those Marxist academic journals, right? Like New Left Review, and what else? Science and Society. There's a lot of them, right? And that's a whole world. I mean, I used to go to Left Forum every year. I don't really go very much anymore. I might return at some point. I might do a workshop at Left Forum, but and who knows if there'll even be a Left Forum ever again, right, with this pandemic. There you go. Okay. Would Marx and Lenin vote for Joe Biden? I don't think so. But it's important to note, I mean, Marx did tell people to vote for Abraham Lincoln, right? That he did, right? Karl Marx endorsed Abraham Lincoln, a Republican. And it was based on the fact that the struggle to defeat slavery was the cutting edge issue of the day, and that Marxists were on, and that if Lincoln had not won the 1864 presidential election, then that would have resulted in that the result would have been the U.S. signing a peace treaty with the South. So that was the issue, was if the Democrats had won the 1864 election, then the Civil War would have been over. There would have been a peace treaty with the South. Well, Marx didn't want that to happen. He wanted to defeat the slaveholders, so he endorsed Lincoln. That was the right thing to do in 1864, right? In 1936, the Communist Party endorsed Roosevelt, who was a Democrat. I think that was the right thing to do. If Roosevelt had not been reelected in 1936, if the Republicans had been able to defeat Roosevelt, that would have been a disaster. So, there's nothing to say that Marx and Lenin wouldn't vote for someone, okay? That's what these folks are missing. There's no reason to think Marx and Lenin wouldn't vote for somebody. They would vote. They would participate in the elections. The question is, how would they participate? I doubt they would participate by voting for Joe Biden. I mean, I doubt it. But those who would say, oh, they would be out in the woods running around with guns. No, they wouldn't. They would realize that this is not the moment to have an armed struggle in the United States. And they would not engage in ultra-left adventurism. That's something they both opposed. But, there are many ways communists can participate in elections, right? They can run their own candidates to raise awareness about communism. They can endorse like movement candidates, like, for example, Henry Wallace of 1948. He wasn't a communist, but he was the progressive candidate. He was a third-party candidate, but every civil rights activist, every militant labor unionist, they all supported him, right? And he was the voice against McCarthyism. When Henry Wallace ran in 48, he technically, he wasn't a communist, but communists endorsed him, right? So sometimes you endorse a communist candidate just to spread your message. Other times you'll endorse a movement candidate. And there'll be times like 1864 or, for example, like 1936, where it's necessary to vote for a mainstream candidate. And then there's times where communists boycott elections. Let's not forget that. Right? The communists sometimes, when revolutionary organizations exist, when there's dual power, and the old order wants to have an election, the communists might say, well, we're not going to do that. We don't recognize you. We're declaring our region to be autonomous or something. So the way communists approach the issue of elections is different in every situation. There's no holy rule, right? People have it in their heads. Thou shalt never support a Democrat is the eternal rule of Marxism. Hear ye, hear ye. Well, they're wrong. That's not how Marxism works, right? And I mean, I remember, I don't campaign for people now, but I campaigned for Charles Barron. Charles Barron, who's a member of this all right, phalangism. Member of the city council, right, in New York City. And I campaigned for him, right? And I didn't, and people are like, oh, you're supporting a Democrat. No, I'm supporting Charles Barron. Charles Barron was pro-Gaddafi. He was pro-Assad. He was a socialist. He called himself an elected revolutionary. He had a big picture of Lenin in his office. I have no shame about campaigning for Charles Barron. Unfortunately, David Duke also endorsed Charles Barron, and the New York Post put that on the front page it was on the front page of every newspaper as a way to hurt Charles Barron. Yeah, I mean, they went all out to try and defeat Charles Barron, right? An African-American man, former Black Panther. He was amazing, and they went all out to defeat him. I mean, I think they had Obama robocalls, and they shipped in. I was in the district on the election day handing out leaflets, and they went all out to destroy Charles Barron, but I campaigned for him. A lot of his supporters are members of the December 12th movement, which is like a black nationalist Marxist grouping. I think Charles Barron is great, and he's a Democrat. I don't care. He's Charles Barron. So that's that. I mean, I don't campaign for people now. My job and all that, I don't do that. But I have no shame about campaigning for a Democrat, right? If there's a Democrat called Charles Barron, I would have campaigned for Charles Barron if he was a Republican, because he was anti-imperialist, he was a socialist, he was great. I mean, there you go. Yeah, I mean, there are times where electoralism is necessary, right? You shouldn't make it a fetish, right? Right? Just reduce the struggle to purely voting. But at the same time, you shouldn't, and then there's other people who are like, oh, we never vote. We're revolutionaries. Don't vote. Revolt. Fight the man. It's just, come on, right? Come on. That's a little bit crazy too, right? For a lot of people, the only time they ever think about politics is when the election rolls around. So if you don't participate in that as a revolutionary, what are you doing? You've got no influence on them, right? If you have nothing to say about an election, right? So there you go. I'll never forget, well, one time I was at a party, and there was a communist at this party selling a newspaper to different people. This one woman said, what do you think about the smoking ban? At the time in Cleveland, they were on the verge of banning smoking in bars, and the communist had no position. And she said, well, that's like the biggest issue in our town right now is the smoking ban. What's the Communist Party think about the smoking ban? Well, he said, I have no idea. If you're a serious communist organizer in a town and they are about to ban smoking in bars, you ought to have a position. You ought to have a position on it as a group, right? And be able to address it. And this woman was not impressed. She said, you're like a communist party. You got this fancy newspaper. You don't have a position on the smoking ban? She had a point, actually, looking back on that. I remember hearing that exchange. It was kind of funny to me at the time, but I look back on it and she was right? If Cleveland was about to have a smoking ban, and she had no position on it. So there you go. Alrighty, Coney 2012. It was this movie that came out. Do you remember that? It was a movie that was all over the internet, and it got debunked. The claim, it was about basically the USA needs to send troops to Africa because there's this monstrous guy named Coney, who's the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. You remember the Lord's Resistance Army, which is this like fanatical Christian evangelical terrorist group in the middle in Africa. And Coney 2012, it was all about, it was one of these like sob story propaganda movies, that was all over the internet and people cried, and it was, invisible children. And Samantha Power, actually the first place that she spoke at after she became UN ambassador under Obama was at a gathering of invisible children. What's wild is the guy who made the movie was this evangelical Christian guy, and his movie, it was kind of exposed that he had been loose with facts. The whole thing was to justify a U.S. military presence in Africa. And the Alex Jones crowd went after it, and the media and social media went after it, and the whole thing got debunked, right? And it was kind of epic, right? It was like they tried to launch an imperialist, propaganda, we need to send the military to Africa campaign, and oops. It just all the some of the claims in the film about Coney and all of that, it fell apart. Not that the LRA is not a horrendous group that did horrendous things. Obviously they are. The Lord's Resistance Army, awful group, right? But this kind of propaganda, we need to send the U.S. military to Africa, So it got debunked, and then the leader of it, if I remember right, he had a psychological breakdown, and so he started running around naked outside and masturbating in public. And then South Park made a joke about jacking in San Diego. They did this whole thing about it, and it became like a meme. I remember that. The other thing about it was that I do remember that when Obama first sent troops to Africa to fight the Lord's Resistance Army, Rush Limbaugh supported the Lord's Resistance Army on his show. And that was epic. That was just, it was unbelievable. It was like Rush Limbaugh is becoming, such a hardcore anti-imperialist. He's like, Barack Obama is sending soldiers to Africa to fight against Christians. Let me read you about the Lord's Resistance Army. They are a group dedicated to the teachings of Jesus Christ. And it was hilarious. Colbert, Stephen Colbert and others made fun of Rush Limbaugh for it. It was really funny. It wasn't even a serious thing. He was just trying to stir up his base. Obama is sending soldiers to Africa to fight against Christians. Oh, unbelievable. Liberals. It was hilarious, right? And it was just like Rush. And it shows the right wing can say whatever they want, right? Do you remember when Glenn Beck was reading from the woman who was the head of the German-American Bund? Elizabeth Dilling. She was a German-American. She was the leader of the German-American Bund. She was a Nazi sympathizer. And she wrote this book called The Red Networks. Red Networks, it was called. I will never forget when Glenn Beck started reading from The Red Networks by Elizabeth Dilling on his show. And he's like, this woman, Elizabeth Dilling, is amazing. She's like the head of the German-American Bund, a Nazi sympathizer. The right wing can do whatever they want, right? And on the left, you can't do anything, right? But the right wing can do whatever they want, you know? It's funny. Well, it's not funny, but, you know, I mean, and the right-wingers, they all just kind of give them a pass, right? You know, there's no one on the right going, oh, my God, did Glenn Beck read that book? No, they tolerate it. But on the left, you know, oh, my God, you do anything anti-imperialist, and there's about 20 people on the internet calling you a fake fascist, a crypto-fascist or whatever. It's so ridiculous. The right wing can do whatever they want, right? And as long as it's, you know, as long as you stick to the script that Democrats are all Islamic, Marxist, terrorist, fascist traitors to the country who hate America and want to take your money and give it to poor people. As long as you stick to this like stupid neocon script, the right wing, they do whatever they want. And the left wing are super, super careful. And the whole thing is ridiculous. All right. Which Star Wars movie do I like better? The first one or Empire Strikes Back? Shining Path in Peru. Okay, yeah. I actually think Empire Strikes Back is better. I mean, it's a little bit sadder. It's not as like, it doesn't leave you as in an up of a mood, but Empire Strikes Back, and many people, it's a climax. I mean, it's you know, Return of the Jedi is the triumphant ending. Star Wars is the introduction. I think when he made the first Star Wars, right, A New Hope or whatever, I think when he made that, he was expecting only to make one movie. And, you know, it's a little bit, you know, that's the one that George Lucas actually directed. And it's a little bit hokey at times, right? But Empire Strikes Back, you know, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, the phrasing in Carbonite, the Cloud City, you know, I mean, the very long Yoda stuff, the Yoda training and the vision, he's in the cave, and, you know, I mean, you know, I think Empire Strikes Back is a much better film, ultimately. You know, I mean, it's more exciting, I guess. But you have to, you know, you need Star Wars to give you the characters first. You need Return of the Jedi to give you your triumphant ending. I don't know. I'm not hugely into Star Wars, honestly. But yeah. You know, I mean, someone asked me which one I liked. When I was a kid, I really liked Star Wars. And I guess so because I was a kid. And, I mean, well, even now, I mean, there's a lot of adults who like Star Wars. And I can talk about Star Wars politics sometimes. But, yeah, I guess Empire Strikes Back is a better movie, I think. All right, favorite Persian food, shishlik. I love shishlik. They would bring you these lamb legs on, they would bring it to you on like a sword, okay? It was amazing. It was just amazing. And you know, it would be like lamb on the bone, but they would bring it to you on this sword, and then you would like peel it off the sword and eat it. It was amazing. It's called shishlik. They have it in Russia too. Shishlik. Amazing stuff. I also really like, they have a, in Iran, they have a, like a cream. That is, it's like sour cream, but with cloves in it, like little onions, you know what I mean? And it's very good with bread, you know what I mean? You put it on bread. How do you respond to those who say, I guess I'll talk about that. You know, I don't know. I'll have to think about whether I'm even going to answer that. All right. Okay. All right. So, could COVID have originated in the USA? I mean, it's possible. Never say never, right? I mean, you know, there was that article that the Center for Global Research got a huge amount of flack for sharing. And there's actually a very good video getting into some of the theories about COVID's origins, other than originating in China. It was made by, what is his name now? His name is slipping out of my mind. But he's a very good, like, he does very good YouTube videos. He's from China, the bald guy. Can't remember his name. Nathan Rich, that's his name. Nathan Rich has a very good video on some of the theories out there. I don't endorse any of those theories. As far as I know, the first place that there was a mass COVID thing was China. Now, some people are saying it was in Spain beforehand. Some people are saying it could have been in the United States beforehand. People are pointing out there were military. I don't know enough about it, and ultimately, we really don't know. I will say that that, you know, with diseases, the origin story is always really much weirder than you think. When they finally dig up the origin story, it's far, far weirder than you think. AIDS, for example, right? Look at the origins of AIDS. That is so weird, right? So when, China says, hey, maybe it didn't originate in China, the fact that there was this like meltdown from the United States, it's like, whoa, like, is it possible it was somewhere else before it got to China? Absolutely. Do I know that? No, I don't know that. And I mean, as far as I can tell, it looks like it started in China. I mean, China is, 1/5 of the world's population. If it was going to start anywhere, huge urban centers, I mean, I'm thinking it would start there, but I don't know that, right? I mean, all the evidence seems to point to it starting in China. But it's possible that it didn't start in China. We don't know, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm leaning toward it started in China, but it's possible. Never say never. And I don't like the fact that there are all these people saying you're not allowed to say that, right? That when a Chinese diplomat dared, oh my God, share an article from the Center for Global Research, oh my God. No, I mean, it's a fair discussion. Diseases and their origins are often weird, right? For a long time, people thought that syphilis, right? Weird story. People thought that syphilis came from America, from Native Americans. That was the belief. For many years, it was taught as historical fact that Christopher Columbus came to the United States, some of his sailors had sex with Native American women, and they brought syphilis back to Europe. That's been disproven. It has been debunked. Syphilis was in Europe before Christopher Columbus got to America. But for years, people believed that. That was a fact. Syphilis, Native American women gave it to Columbus. False. Debunked, right? Debunked. It was totally debunked, right? Syphilis did not come from Native Americans. But for years, people believed that, and it was debunked. Where did syphilis come from? Well, it came from somebody somewhere in the Middle East or Europe, I believe, and it came from human beings engaging in activities with sheep, okay? That's disgusting. But there you go. Did George Lucas interview... Oh, yeah, okay. We'll talk about that, right? But that's apparently where it came from. But it did not come from Native Americans. Somebody somewhere did something with a sheep and then spread it to humans. That's pretty wild. But, that's, I mean, and again, the origin of diseases is often far more weird than you think, right? And for you, I mean, it could be that 300 years from now, a new theory, and we discover that COVID came from somewhere we completely didn't know, right? And they're still arguing about this stuff. They're still arguing about this stuff, right? About where this started, where that started, right? I mean, the Black Plague, right? How many theories are there about where the bubonic plague started? So why can't we talk about it? Why do we just have to say, China did it, China guilty, evil China, yes, hail Trump? No, let's talk about it, right? Nothing wrong with asking questions, right? Okay. Someone said, Joanne said she was in Iran in 1979. It was very hospitable. Well, I was in Iran, much more recently than that, and it was very hospitable. The Iranians are famous for their hospitality. And the sanctions and the way they've harassed people and for going to Iran and stuff is just uncalled for, right? I think Americans should be able to visit Iran, or Iranians should be able to visit the United States. I think it would be great if our countries could get along better. So that's my position, and you're right, Joanne. They are amazing hosts, amazing. Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana during the 1930s. He first became, I think, governor in 1928. He eventually became U.S. senator before he was shot. He was an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, progressive, amazing guy. I am a huge admirer of Huey Long. I quote him in the new book on Kamala Harris. I have a whole section on Huey Long. I mean, it's a tragedy, right? The Communist Party and Huey Long did not get along, and I've talked about why that is and other lies, and I think somebody actually cut that section. It's on YouTube. There's Caleb talking about Huey Long that someone cut out. I'm a big fan of Huey Long. Huey Long, I mean, he was elected and he fought for the common people, and he was like the Hugo Chavez of Louisiana. He taxed the oil money of the Rockefellers, and he used it to build schools and bridges and give kids textbooks in their schools and build roads so farmers could drive their products to the stores. And he was an amazing progressive. Phalangism, that is Spanish fascism. That's Franco, right? The Franco regime. And it's particularly nasty, right? Basque separatists, they used to... the way Franco would execute people was through strangulation, right? Communist regimes, they executed a lot of people, right? Death penalty was practiced in communist countries, but they tended to try and make it as painless as possible. It was, firing squad. Or I've even heard of, like, they talk about the long walk, where the person, they would, like, take them out of their cell, they'd be walking, and then they would, from behind, just blow their head off. But, the idea was not to cause the person pain. The idea was, to execute this person for breaking a law, and that was that. The idea was not to sadistically take pleasure in harming them. But fascists are a completely different breed, right? And Franco, the way they would execute people, particularly communist dissidents and Basque separatists, was strangulation, where they would have the person with something around their neck, and they would just keep turning it slowly in front of a group of people who would be, like, applauding and cheering as the person's face is, like, turning blue and they're being strangled to death. That's fascism. Fascism is it takes pleasure in harming other people. It views some people as naturally inferior to others. It seeks to reinforce that hierarchy with brutality and killing. Fascism is an ideology for weaklings. It's an ideology for people who deep down see themselves as weak and are terrified of defying authority and are in awe of big, strong, powerful people because they want to be one, right? Fascism is Ayn Rand. Fascism is, fascism is an ideology of people who are too cowardly to stand up to the rich and powerful. They see the rich people, and they can't, oh no, I can't oppose them, because if I oppose the rich people, then I might not be rich, or I might be defying authority. Let's invent some crazy Star Wars story about who really rules the world. I don't worry, Mr. Capitalist man, I don't oppose you. I oppose the magical Illuminati Jewish conspiracy. That's who I oppose. Oh, you're not part of that, are you, Mr. Capitalist? Oh, good. I'll help you. I'll go break the strike for you. Those protesters wanting higher wages, they're all a bunch of commies who don't like the country. I'll go beat them up for you, Mr. Boss Man. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Fascism is an ideology for weak, pathetic people. That's really what it is, right? They don't have the courage to investigate Marxism, right? So much of fascism is just, how can I not be a communist? Okay, well, geez, I can't be a communist, so, geez, but I want the economy to get better. I know, I'll be a national socialist, right? Because regular socialists are unpatriotic. My boss told me that. I can't be a communist. My boss told me communists are unpatriotic, so I'll be a national socialist. A socialist who's not an evil, unpatriotic piece of shit. Oh, good. Hey, boss, don't worry. I'm not one of those unpatriotic communists. I'm a national socialist. It's pathetic. It's pathetic, right? And all the anti-capitalism of fascists is like paper thin. They don't believe it. They don't care about it. They're focused on beating up communists, killing communists, putting communists in prison camps, murdering communists. They're focused on punishing poor people, punishing ethnic minorities, and all of that. And then the anti-Semitism is just an excuse. It's like they don't want to really oppose capitalism. So anti-Semitism is this way they can just kind of be ethnically bigoted, but hold on to some notion of class struggle, right? It's like they're not smart enough to actually understand how capitalism works, but they understand there's this one race, and they're different than my race, and a lot of them have money, and it's like August Bebel, he famously said, anti-Semitism is socialism for fools. And that's totally correct, right? It's like you talk to anti-Semitic folks, which unfortunately I have been a lot of different places, folks, and I've been in the same room and had conversations with some, not just any anti-Semites, right? I've talked with some rather prominent anti-Semites, and that's a whole nother story. But I'll tell you, these folks ain't too bright. It's like, economics, unemployment, capital. It's like they sit there, well, there's this other race, and they have more money than my race, so my race is going to get together and we're going to beat down this other race, and so my race have money. My race have more money. It's like cavemen or something. It's like, him race have too much money. Me race get together, beat up him race. It's like it is ignorant stupidity. I have no respect for fascism whatsoever. None. I read you my article there, and Fascism is primitive and stupid. I'm sorry. It's like Mein Kampf. People are always like, you want to understand Hitler, read Mein Kampf. Go read Alfred Rosenberg's The Myth of the 20th Century. You want to talk about stupid. It's just pages and pages and pages of stupid, right? I'm sorry. Go and, British Israelism. Yeah, that's classic, right? Everyone in all of world history has gotten Palestine wrong. Palestine was actually in Britain. Didn't you know that? It's like And it's like they will believe whatever they want out of this desperation to hold on to their bigotry. Deep down, fascism is rooted in a desire of they don't want to actually fight people that are stronger than them. That's really all it's about. They don't want to fight people who are more strong and more powerful than them. When they see a powerful person beating up on someone weaker than them, they just sympathize with the powerful person. They sympathize with bullies. They sympathize with lynch mobs. They sympathize with that's what fascism is. They are so weak. They are so weak inside. They don't have the courage to admit that bullies and murderers and lynch mobs are wrong. So they have to invent some way, some complicated ideology through which they can end up siding with the bullies and mass murderers and racists and bigots. That's all it is. That's really all it is. And sorry to get fired up, but I just, I'm sorry. That's what it is deep down. Fascism is a broken person. It is a broken person, right? It is somebody who has been so badly treated in their life that they have lost the ability to be heroic. They no longer can empathize with Robin Hood, with Superman, with somebody using their strength to protect the weak. In their mind, they always must support the rich and powerful person. They must always support the more privileged person. They must always support the person in the position of power because they've been broken. They have been broken of their ability to assert their humanity. So there you go. I'm sure I'm going to get hate over that from a lot of people. I don't care. And I'm sure that won't change the minds of people who insist I must be a fascist, right? That's the crazy thing. I must be a fascist, right? I mean, if people hear what I just said, it doesn't matter, right? I'm sure everything I just said is somehow a secret code to let you all know I'm actually a fascist. I mean, this is, you can't, the left has lost its mind. The left has lost its mind, and I think that's why, to be fair, I think there's a lot of people that are exploring fascism now that wouldn't have explored it in previous decades because they look at the left and they want to barf. And so then they think, oh, I guess I must be a fascist. And that's really, really sad. And that's really, really sad. But we need to make a left that is actually about strength and heroism. That's the point of my Kamala Harris book. That's how I end the Kamala Harris book. And I talk about the motivations of real leftism and Huey Long. I'm giving away the ending of my book. You got to check out the Kamala Harris book. I talk about how Kamala Harris represents the distortion of what leftism has become. Donald Trump represents something particularly dark as well. But there is this genuine spirit of progressive leftism that has been lost, right? This heroism, this whatever happened to Tom Joad, right? You ever read Grapes of Wrath? The hero is Tom Joad, right? Right? Tom Joad, right? Whenever you see a cop beating a guy, Mom, I'll be there, right? I mean, whatever happened to Tom Joad? Whatever happened to Joe Hill? We have lost the notion of a left-wing hero, right? We have woke mobs that are crazy and triggered, and then we have scary bullies on the right. We need the notion of heroism. We need Huey Long again. You know what I mean? We need Roosevelt again. We need William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and Huey Newton again. You know what I'm saying? We need, actual leftist politics. But anyway, what do I think of the Shining Path in Peru? I've addressed this on like 5 different lives, but I'll repeat myself very quickly. I don't really think very highly of them. The only way I would sympathize with them, recession began. All right. And I'm going to be wrapping this up soon because it's getting late and, anyway. Okay, so Shining Path in Peru. Don't think very highly of them. I mean, the only thing that I could say that was positive about them is that there are a lot of indigenous people in Peru and a lot of rural folks who are very, very poor, and that the Shining Path gave them a voice, and it put Peruvian society and Latin America in general on notice about how many poor, desperately poor people there are and how they are going to rise up like a mighty storm. And that was a good thing. But other than that, I mean, they bombed the Chinese embassy. They bombed the Cuban embassy. They engaged in terrorist violence, not only against civilians, but against other communist parties. Every communist I have ever met from Peru hates the Shining Path, right? And that's Marxist-Leninists, that's Hojists, that's Trotskyists, that's other Maoists. Everyone says the Shining Path were nut jobs. They were violent, extremist nut jobs. They cut people's heads off. Their trademark was hanging dogs, and they were, you read their literature. They're not thinking about economics. They're not thinking about class struggle. It's, we're going to take over, and we're the Shining Path. We're going to take over and make it heaven on earth. They were almost like Blanquists or something. And they were crazy ultra-leftists, and they engaged in crazy violence. They were kind of like a cult, right? And, then the leader got captured, and the leader was put into prison, and then that was the end, because the great leader, the great leader, his holy name, he's been locked up, so we can't keep fighting. A whole army surrenders just because one guy gets captured. I mean, do you think the Chinese Revolution would have ended if they'd arrested Mao at some point? I mean, no. I mean, the whole thing is just a nightmare. I don't have any admiration, really, for the Shining Path. I really don't. And the same for the Naxals, right? I mean, it's like, it's one thing when people have no choice, they have a mass movement behind them, they engage in mass struggle. It's something else when, Peru, it's got urban centers. And, there's all these people organizing factory workers and all of that. And did the Shining Path try to build a united front with those people? No. The Shining Path killed those people. And it went around assassinating other communist leaders that organized trade unions and did stuff. Well, that's not cool. And the same with the Naxals. The Naxals, India has the second largest working class in the entire world. Only China has a bigger working class than India. But do the Naxals go and try to organize the workers? No. What do? They kill the people that are trying to organize the workers, right, for being revisionists. They actually assassinate leaders of the Communist Party of India, leaders of the Socialist Unity Center of India, and leaders of the Communist Party of India, Marxists. They go around killing the people that are actually organizing the workers, and they're waging their rural people's war up in the mountains. Not really admiring that. This is people that fetishize what Mao did in the 1930s, and they don't understand that the world has changed. And the world has changed, right? A lot has changed, and that the violence, the not willing to build a united front with other groups. Not working for me. There's a lot of communists in Peru who don't like, there's a lot of communists in India, but we need to get over. There's a lot of young people that really they're attracted to communism because they have like a Che Guevara fantasy, and they're attracted to armed struggle. They think it's like sexy and romantic and all that. That is not working class. Fetishizing violence is not working class. It's just not, right? The communists seek to take power peacefully. So there you go. All right. I don't want to answer the racial realist question. I'm not going to go there. George Lucas. Yeah, a very famous interview that George Lucas gave, and where he said that Soviet filmmakers have more freedom because as long as they don't go against communism, they have more artistic freedom. Whereas if you make movies in the United States, you're going to have the people, you're going to have the advertising and the corporation that's sponsoring you breathing down your neck. That's true, right? I mean, and the Soviet filmmakers did do a lot more experimental stuff. Yeah, they were not allowed to make anti-communist films. Other than that, they were okay. Okay, I've addressed, all right, Huey Long, fascist. Oh boy, all right. All righty, all right. Okay, now, someone says there's economic data showing we're in the beginning of a recession. You better believe it. You better believe it, sir. You drive down people's wages. You gut the country's infrastructure. You start a trade war with China, the second largest economy in the world. You get rid of labor unions, and you ship good-paying industrial jobs overseas. You replace human labor with machines. It's all going to add up. You bet your britches we're at the beginning of a great recession. This is capitalism's Gotterdammerung. I talk about it in my book. This is the big economic meltdown that Marx predicted, right? Where they eliminate workers from machines. Okay. All right. Why do people call Huey Long a fascist? Why do people call Huey Long a fascist? Oh, okay. MZT versus Ultra Maoists. All right. MZT versus Ultra Maoists. All righty. Why do people call Huey Long a fascist? That's because of the fact that right? The Communist Party, they were the party that was building labor unions. And they supported Roosevelt, right? Roosevelt supported organized labor, and communists supported Roosevelt. And Roosevelt was aligned with the Rockefellers, right? Roosevelt came out of New York City politics, and he always had this kind of alliance with the Rockefellers. And as Roosevelt got friendlier to organized labor, he kind of protected the Rockefellers from the rest of their class. The main opposition to Roosevelt came from the National Association of Manufacturers, which was factory owners, and Henry Morgan and Henry Ford. And meanwhile, Huey Long took power in Louisiana, and what Huey Long did is he taxed the Rockefellers. He taxed Standard Oil. Every barrel of oil that they refined, he taxed them. So Huey Long took power by kicking the Rockefellers' ass. Roosevelt took power by entering a strategic alliance with the Rockefellers against the rest of the capitalist class. So there were two sides there, right? So Huey Long was the enemy of the Rockefellers. Roosevelt was aligned with them. The Communist Party and the labor movement were aligned with Roosevelt. Huey Long, as he started to get presidential, started to make friends on a national stage with the National Association of Manufacturers because he was fighting the Rockefellers. And here's the thing. Louisiana was an almost overwhelmingly and completely rural state, right? It had ports, dock workers, but there was very little manufacturing in Louisiana. There was oil, there was ports, but for the most part, it was a rural state. Huey Long was very much in a way, you could say Huey Long was more like Mao, right? He was organizing the countryside. That's who Huey Long was supported by. It was the farmers, the low-income, poor farmers, a lot of whom didn't even own their own land. They're the ones who backed Huey Long. And when Huey Long was being impeached, they're the ones that poured into the Capitol to support Huey Long. So Huey Long was supported by small farmers and a lot of local business owners against the Rockefellers, who were getting rich off Louisiana's oil. He started taxing the Rockefellers, used the money to start building up a state apparatus controlling the economy of Louisiana. Roosevelt, on the other hand, is in alliance with the Rockefellers. The National Association of Manufacturers tries to remove him in a coup, the 1933 business plot. They're moving against him. So he's supporting organized labor. So the Communist Party is supporting Roosevelt and kind of entering this Popular Front alliance with the Rockefellers because they're anti-fascist. Huey Long, on the other hand, is supporting small farmers and kicking Rockefeller's ass. And then as he's moving on to a national stage to run for president right before he's killed, at that point he's making overtures to the National Association of Manufacturers because they're the ones that are anti-Roosevelt, and he's going to run against Roosevelt. So there was a divide in the ruling class, and because Huey Long was in Louisiana, and because he was aligned with small farmers, and because he was fighting against the Rockefellers, Huey Long was on the other side of the divide in the ruling class than Roosevelt. That's what it was about. Now, Huey Long got killed before the rise of the CIO, right? In 1936 and 37, after Huey Long was dead, you had the epic moment where the sit-down strike wave happened. Now, if Huey Long had opposed the sit-down strike wave, at that point, you could have called him a fascist, because at that point, but I don't know if he would have done that, honestly. I mean, who knows what would have happened, right? Who knows? Who knows what would have happened, right, if Huey Long had lived? Huey Long was anti-racist, and he was as anti-racist as you could have been in Louisiana in the 1930s. Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panthers, is named after him. He enabled black people to become nurses. Huey Long had black ministers that officially worked for his campaign. Huey Long was very, 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 very progressive. And when they attempted to remove him, when there was an attempt to remove him and drive him out of the governor's mansion, the propaganda in all the newspapers in Louisiana called him a communist and compared him to Abraham Lincoln and called him out for being anti-racist, for giving jobs to black people and things like that. So Huey Long was a progressive in Louisiana. On the national stage, he didn't line up the same way. And that's the tragedy of politics. That is the tragedy of politics. All right, somebody asked me about events that I have no way of knowing about, so I have no way of knowing about what's going on. I mean, I know what the reports are, and I see what's being said, but I mean, I have no idea why this person is ill that you mentioned. So, I know what's being widely alleged, and I take that with a grain of salt, but I don't know. The other question I was asked is, are these people authoritarian? What does authoritarian mean? Like, do Russia and China have states? Yes. Do those states, do they have militaries and policing agencies? Yes. That's just like, whatever. All right. Ultra Maoists versus Mao Zedong thought. Well, one of the big differences is that, Mao entered an alliance. Mao entered an alliance strategically, you'll recall, with Chiang Kai-shek, right? There was the first united front where the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party worked together, and the Communists were actually a faction inside of the KMT. Then Chiang Kai-shek betrayed them, so they entered, they went to the countryside. But then there was the second united front against the Japanese invaders. And again, Mao and Chiang Kai-shek worked together, right? And then after the Second World War, there was a civil war. So Mao understood that you have to make alliances in order to move toward taking power. Mao aligned with Chiang Kai-shek not once, but twice. Can they? They could. In theory. It's possible. I don't know if the Russian Communist Party has that kind of strength or not, but it's possible. Legally, in terms of the Constitution, that's certainly possible. Another difference between Mao and the ultra Maoists, right, is that Mao very much, was in favor of having alliances with many different countries. Mao, had diplomatic relations. He tried to have a relationship with the Soviet Union. It didn't work out, but he maintained relations with a lot of Eastern European countries. He maintained relations with North Korea. He maintained relations with Cuba. And that Mao favored having an alliance with many different anti-imperialist states. Let's not forget that under Mao's leadership, China built the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway, right? Pakistan had a right-wing military dictatorship. That didn't stop Mao from working with Pakistan to build this giant highway, the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway. Let's not forget that the first railroads built in Africa by China were not built recently. They were built under Mao, and Mao supported Julius Nyerere, right, the leader of Tanzania, and sent lots of railroad workers to Tanzania under the leadership of Julius Nyerere. And Julius Nyerere was not a Maoist, right? He was a Marxist, anti-imperialist, but he was not, an ultra-Maoist. But did that stop Mao from shaking his hand and working with him? Mao believed in working with all kinds of different people internationally. Now, in the final years of his life, I wouldn't endorse some of the international relations that he did, but these ultra Maoists say you should never associate with anyone who's a revisionist or who blah 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 blah. They don't support Venezuela because it's not truly socialist in their mind. They don't support modern China. Mao wasn't like that. Mao supported Julius Nyerere. Mao worked with even the military dictatorship in Pakistan, right? He understood, just like he understood with Chiang Kai-shek, you have to make alliances with people, right? Mao favored repeatedly. He didn't want to have a civil war with Chiang Kai-shek. He wanted to form a joint government. If you look, 1946, 1947, Mao is repeatedly saying the people of China don't want a civil war and urging Chiang Kai-shek to form a unified government, right? These ultra-Maoists say, well, revolution, people's war. No, Mao did not want to have a war. Mao, even on the brink of taking power, Mao was trying to form an alliance with the nationalists and try to figure out a way to have a joint government and not have a big civil war where a bunch of people die. There's many, many examples, right? The ultra-Maoists don't want to form any alliances, right? And it's either you're with them or you're against them. Mao wasn't like that. The ultra-Maoists don't want to associate with any country in the world that it's anti-imperialist or whatever, right? Unless it's pure in their minds. Mao wasn't like that, right? Ultra-Maoists glorify violence and killing. Mao wasn't like that. What do you know about Duterte? A lot. Duterte, he's a loudmouth. He runs his mouth a lot, and he's a big disappointment. Many people thought he would be far more progressive than he was. He's associated with anti-drug vigilantism, which has a progressive side to it, right? Drug gangs or something. In Mexico, people have formed vigilante anti-drug groups. In the Philippines, in a lot of working class neighborhoods, the community has formed vigilante anti-drug groups to fight cartels. Duterte comes out of the anti-drug cartel uprisings among the masses, and he was the mayor of a city for a while, and he was a populist, kind of a social democratic populist. Now, under his presidency, we've seen that, he's the first president the Philippines has had that hasn't been completely a puppet of the United States. And that's a good development. I would consider Duterte to be a lot like Modi in India, to be a lot like Erdogan in Turkey. He's a bourgeois nationalist. Now, many of us hoped, because he appointed a member of the Communist Party to his cabinet when he first got elected, because he had this friendship and this relationship with Joe Hassan, many of us hoped that he would move in like the Bolivarian direction, and he would move from bourgeois nationalism to socialism, and he would be progressive. That did not happen, right? We've seen that there's still a war going on. He's not negotiated peace with the Maoists. We've seen that, yes, he was able to negotiate around the South China Sea and make a deal there, but overall, he's been a big disappointment. He's waged, there was a campaign of violence all around the country against drug users, vigilante killings after he got elected that was pretty awful. There was martial law declared in some of the regions in which they're fighting Muslims, in which people's rights were pretty widely violated. And I was optimistic when Duterte got elected. In fact, the only article I've ever written that was republished by InfoWars and Alex Jones was an article I wrote called Drugs, Duterte, and the Nature of Imperialism. And I was explaining why opposing drug use is not right-wing, and that just because Duterte is associated with anti-drug groups doesn't mean he's not a leftist or a progressive. And in that article, I was optimistic about Duterte. Well, not anymore. Duterte has been a big letdown. But at the same time, it's better him than somebody who's just a puppet of the United States, right? I mean, Duterte is a little more independent. He's friendlier to China, South China Sea. He's better than what was there before, but he's awful, right? That's my position on Duterte, right? I was hoping he would be better than he turned out to be, right? I was hoping he would be another Hugo Chavez. And it would have been possible. I mean, that could have happened, but that's not the way the wind blew, as they say, right? And, he's kind of like Erdogan, kind of like Modi. He's a bourgeois nationalist. He will make a deal with Russia and China if it's in his interest. He'll make a deal with the United States if it's in his interest, right? He will make a deal with whoever will give him the best deal for the bourgeoisie of the Philippines. And that's who he is, basically. That's my position. Folks, it's late and I am tired. I am tired. Folks, I think we're going to cut it off here. Sorry if I'm coming across as a little grumpy. I'm just a little bit tired. So ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat this aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, folks. All my best wishes.